Birth of a Thief by Paul Sating. Narrated by Hem Cleveland. Chapter 1. Friends and Enemies. By Allidor's eyes, Yuni hissed, her father's appearance nearby ruining everything she'd planned. Rolling behind the half-stump of a long-dead oak tree that once provided valuable shade to her family's home, she assessed her surroundings. Hegil Timbravi crossed the open plot of land, headed back to the small, decaying barn he always said he'd repair, but never did. Yuni thought he'd already strapped the plough to Bailey, their draft horse, and was busy in the field. Her inattention to his whereabouts almost led to her being caught before she snuck away. Only by the blessing of Relka, the god of nature and kindness, did her presence outside the house go undetected and the subsequent beating undelivered. Peering above the stump, she surveyed the open field ahead. It would be difficult to cross without being detected before she reached the Whispering Woods. Hundreds of strides laid between her and freedom. If her father had been in the field, she would already be away. A quick distraction, that was all she needed. Yuni was fast enough to disappear the moment he turned his back to something like a stubborn horse or troublesome goat, but now she was caught between two minds. If she waited him out, she would reach the forest undetected. But that meant risking her mother noticing her absence from the upstairs loft where Yuni was supposed to be patching clothes. Neither option being attractive, Yuni, 14 cycles old, sprang from behind the stump and cut across the field, using the thickest area of cornstalk to provide cover, careful not to move any if she could help it. Many areas were sparse, threatening a meagre yield later in the season, and would be easier to navigate without drawing attention. Moving through them would be quicker, but there was too much chance moving to the dead side of the fields, closer to where her father worked. If he were to catch me. The thought was dark and troubling, the catalyst to why she was doing this in the first place. No, even if the healthy part of the field was slower and forced her to be more careful, it still gave her the best chance of getting away. Getting away wasn't good enough. She needed to disappear and return from this important event without either of her parents realizing that she was gone. Her feet landing softly on the mud, Yuni's heart thudded, half from the excitement and exhilaration and half out of fear. She raced towards the Whispering Woods. The trees called to her. Lately, the woods had become the only place in her tiny world where she felt like herself, where she could be herself. As she ran deeper into the field, that nightmare world faded away, only her panting breaths and the wind whipping by filled her ears, obscuring the sounds of the hopeless life on the farm. Please, Jenfir, let me do this without them discovering. Yuni prayed to the god of blessings. Jenfir didn't answer as the tree line approached. The weight of Allidor lifted from her shoulders as soon as Yuni leaped into the first row of trees in the Whispering Woods, the place where she would meet her mortal enemy. Snickering, she sprang through the trees toward battle. War had come to Farlene, at least for her and one other. 100 march paces into the forest, she neared the spot where battle would commence. Yuni slowed and dropped to a crouch, moving through the underbrush and using the largest trees as cover. Varel, her enemy, would too. He could be anywhere, even right behind her. As cautious as she'd been escaping her father's eye, she needed to be tenfold as careful with Varel. She circled the tree, the large oak as wide as a bull, hoping to catch Varel, unsuspecting if he were following her. But he wasn't on the other side. Nothing was but a green layer of lush forest that mocked her mistake in silence. She'd anticipated him bending the rules and failed. Had he witnessed her miscalculation? Could it be part of his larger plot to destroy her? Covering her blush, Yuni approached the agreed battle space, deftly launching herself over a fallen log and seeing the puddle on the other side at the last moment. On her descent toward the slimy water, she adjusted in mid-flight, landing one-footed in a half-submerged rock and relaunching herself before her other foot struck the brackish water. When she landed, it was not only on solid ground, but also a dried branch. It cracked under her assault. The sound seemed to fill the Whispering Woods, and she grimaced, crouching behind the undersized underbrush in front of her, waiting for any sign that her enemy noticed. Her heart started. The wind made the foliage dance in a sartarello, an irreverent reaction to the grave struggle between two humans occurring in their realm. "Where are you?" Yuni whispered in a low growl. The whispering woods was not large, deep, or dense. Plenty of sun streamed through the gaps in the trees, lighting the forest floor and illuminating the flora. That was when she saw it. A thick fig leaf swayed in the opposite direction of the others around it, against the wind. "Varel." Yuni drew her sword, sure that it was him and not a wayward forest troll or even a boar. The poor beast would get a nasty surprise if she were wrong. "Hopefully I don't find myself on the wrong end of a tusk," Yuni smiled to herself, moving toward the unnaturally swaying bush. 30 paces deeper, she paused to listen. To her left, the slight signal she'd been searching for, the crunching of a leather-covered foot on the moist forest floor. Varel had trained her how to distinguish between human and beast, and now his own lessons would initiate his demise. The battle she'd waited weeks for was about to begin. The forest was a chaotic maze of sporadic trees and thick underbrush, perfect for concealment for small animals and sneaky humans. And if Varel was anything, he was the latter. A gust blew through the trees, overlaying the sound of the rhythmic, careful steps of the hidden figure. Yuni crept in the direction where she first heard the noise, convinced she had pinpointed the boy she was here to beat to mush. She took a single straight-line approach, even though she had to be careful. If she had the advantage, she wanted to keep it. The circular path was safer, but it would take longer and give Varel time to find a good defensive position. 15 paces away, Yuni paused, holding her breath and listening. Nothing but wind. In frustration, she gripped the hilt of her wood sword tighter, the leather gloves creaking against its rough surface. If she was quiet enough, Varel would give his location away. But then, she lost the battle before it began. "Aha!" a human voice taunted from behind as the point of a sword was pressed against the base of her neck, splitting her auburn hair. She felt a snag, like he'd caught her tunic collar. "You've given yourself away, handing yourself over to fate. So sloppy." Yuni tucked her head and dove, rolling forward while bringing her sword up in a horizontal block just as he swung down at her. Wood cracked against wood, echoing around the small area of the forest. She kicked out, connecting with his shin. Varel winced and yanked his leg up instinctively. As he did, Yuni, still planted on a single leg, her sweeping legs still to the side, spun in a complete circle, her leg extended and connected with his standing ankle, wiping it out. He went down in a heap and cursed. "Oof." She was on her feet first. The advantage was hers once again. From the ground, Varel, his dark eyes twinkling, wore a grin that split his short moustache and beard. His facial hair was too full, too thick for someone of 16 cycles, but Yuni still liked it. His mature look countered his boyish temperament. "Impressive counter, Tumbravi," he taunted, his hands raised in surrender. She backed away. Varel would never give up so easily. This was a trap. His eyes betrayed his secret when he narrowed them. "Ha! Now you're thinking, little criminal. I thought I could lure you in a step closer," he said as he got to his feet, even as he reached inside his breeches, pulling out a dagger, this one with the foot-long wooden blade. Yuni dipped her sword toward the new weapon. "You forget, I've seen that move before." Varel hefted the dagger, checking its weight with a teasing smile. He tossed it in the air, smoothly catching it on the descent. "So you have." She growled. Even knowing Varel's games of provocation, it was still so difficult to resist the fire burning in her gut. The corner of her lip pulled back in a snarl as she brought her sword to the ready. "It looks as if you want to fight," Varel said, moving to his right, her left, forcing Yuni to rotate, keeping her on her weaker hand. "I wish it didn't always come to this, Tumbravi. My father, the great Uta Nuwu, was once the best fighter in the land. Much like me, he told me many cycles ago that it was my birthright." Yuni lunged forward, bringing her sword up, eliminating the opportunity Varel had to keep her on her weak side. She struck and he blocked, but she kept moving as to not be put on her weak hand again. I know, it is your birthright to eradicate the scum from the face of Allidor." Her sword arced through the air in a 45-degree angle, aimed just to the side of Varel's obnoxiously flowing black locks. His dagger pushed away her blow, and Varel used Yuni's momentum to propel her forward, even as his backhand swing connected with the back of her knee. The punch sent her crashing into the muddy soil, burning as the joint stiffened. That would cause a limp she would have to work out before returning home. "Be careful, you dolt," she said, trying to hide her grimace. Varel loosed an obnoxious laugh. "Is the weak, slimy Tumbravi worried about hiding her sword training from her father? If that is the case, the way I see it, you have a choice to make." Back on her feet, her knee nearly collapsing, Yuni faced him, holding her weapon in both hands as she tried to steady herself. She hadn't thought to bring a second weapon because they hadn't agreed on those terms, and she had nothing that would pass as one. With the bad knee and one less weapon, she felt vulnerable, almost naked in front of Varel, her cheeks flushed with humiliation. "And what choice is that?" She moved to her left, trying to outflank him to stay on her dominant hand. He shrugged, a corner of his lip curling towards his thin, handsome nose. "Either you admit to your father you've been secretly dancing steel with me," he said carefully, taking a tentative step forward. Yuni moved a step to the left and he cut her off. "Or you get better." Varel lunged forward, his sword low and his dagger arcing high. She turned her sword point toward the ground, connecting solidly with his and deflecting it out of her frame, even as she ducked underneath the dagger strike. She moved in as he fell off balance, but he was quick, regaining his balance and spinning already on her again. A succession of blows, one after another, made her hands tingle from the vibrations sent down the wood hilt. It was all Yuni could do to fend off the combination of strikes from his two weapons. Without time to check her surroundings, she had no idea where the fight was taking her or what she could use to slow him. All of her focus was on the rain of blows coming from Varel Nuo, the biggest cowhoof in all of Farlene. "Back, back, back," he pushed her. Every time she attempted to outflank her enemy, he moved quicker, literally, than anyone in the village moved forward, cutting her off. Varel was a gifted fighter, which was why she bugged him to spar so often, but Yuni was tired of him always coming out on top. "Not the only reason I want to dance steel," she caught herself thinking, losing her focus on what was important in the moment. Varel, as focused as ever, never ceased his assault. He led with the sword to keep her on the defensive and off balance, while attempting to land blows with the dagger. More than a few times he caught her on the forearm or wrist, one time cracking it so hard she thought he'd broken it. Almost dropping her sword, Yuni forced herself to grip it tighter, otherwise the battle would end. As she moved back, Varel looked at the effect of his strike and raised a curious, almost humid eyebrow before shaking his head and tossing his long black hair out of his eyes. Was he impressed? Allidor's eyes, why couldn't she focus like he did? Why was Varel so infuriatingly distracting? Another swing, this one coming horizontally, forced Yuni to hop to her left as she swung to block the blow. Her balance was off, and the dagger found the mark, this time her other wrist. When it landed, even he winced. Tears welled in Yuni's eyes, but she would spew a curse back at Tantor, the god of curses, before Varel would see her cry. Still, both injured wrists burned. Moving her sword, even defensively, was a struggle. In the back of her mind, Yuni knew the wounds would force her to hide her wrists for the next few days while she worked around the house. That would be easy enough. Hiding the injuries if her father told her to help him outside with the animals would be a much more difficult challenge. He'd think it odd that she'd wear her sleeves down in the middle of summer. Varel wasn't being careful, breaking the unspoken rule they had with each other. He knew better. They had shared many secrets in the times that followed sparring sessions, that both her parents disapproved of her wishes to receive sword training. He knew. Varel knew what might happen if she was ever found out. Yuni roared and pressed forward, swinging wildly. Varel had a sharpness to his eyes as he focused on her blows, blocking each, but she was testing him as she pushed him back toward a thick oak tree. Her attack shook his confidence. She could tell by the way he scrambled to block her strikes. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, one trailing down the side of his face. Her muscles burned with exertion, the sword feeling heavier now than at any other point, but rage fueled her forward. Rage or fear of being found out. Varel kicked out. Yuni was in mid-strike, all of her weight on her left leg. He connected solidly, sending both of them backward in opposite directions. "Cheater," she growled between gasps. Kicking was taboo. They moved right, left, then right again, each measuring the other, both attempting to anticipate when the next opportunity to strike would come. But the momentum she had gained was gone with Varel's thwarting kick. If she didn't regain the advantage soon, he would be on top of the fight. Yuni feigned right, hoping to draw Varel in that direction. Before waiting to see if he'd take the bait, she dodged left, swinging low, aiming at his ankles to knock his feet out. Varel dodged enough that her blade only grazed his wool breeches. The forceful miss sent her out of control, flinging forward toward the tree behind where he had just stood. He pinned her sword against it with his, and then smacked her forearm with a dagger, sending a bolt of pain shooting up her arm through her shoulder. "Ouch!" she shouted. The wave of rage inside turned to a fire. Boiling in her gut, Yuni shook. Varel was being too aggressive. He said their training would come to this at some point, that it was the only way she would improve. But this was irresponsible. Bruises would rise within the day. She could sneak away from home and return easily enough, but explaining these injuries wouldn't be so simple. Bailey was too good of a horse to take all the blame, even if her parents brought the lie. The fire consuming her threatened to boil over. She was losing control of herself and her thoughts. That's exactly where he wants me. The more she recognized she was falling into his plan, the more her anger grew. As it did, her concentration slipped. There was something deeper beyond the rage, beyond the betrayal and pain from Varel going against his word. Something raw, innate, something deep inside that called to her now, as it had numerous times over the past 2 cycles since her first blood. The times when her father's anger threatened to come out in backhands and throwing her around. The times when she watched him slap her mother around the home because an animal had died or he hadn't sold enough at the market. The times when he had sold well, but spent the night in the village inn, drinking enough mead to empty the lake of tears itself. Disguised as rage, it called to her. In the past, Yuni had tried to reach out and always felt the power there, but just beyond her ability to grasp it, like trying to grab a frog in water. But in this moment, she searched for the source. It wasn't adrenaline or fire or a burning desire to hurt Varel as he had hurt her. This was something deeper, a presence that commanded her attention and promised untapped release. She reached. It was almost there, the tantalizing, searing promise of power. A whisper of a trace hovered there, near but far, just out of her mind's reach. If she tapped into it, if she could just reach. Her thoughts were broken when a dagger smacked against her other forearm, the only extremity on her upper body that wasn't burning with pain and humiliation. Just like that, the source of power dissipated. Allidor's eyes, Varel! Yuni held her forearm against her stomach, her sword drooping in her grip, its point resting in the muddy dirt. His eyes widened. I'm sorry, Yuni. I let the battle fury get the better of me. He moved closer to check on her injuries. She pulled her arm in closer. You're a real jerk, do you know that? I don't know how Elise will live with you when the pair of you wed. He pulled back, his guilt disappearing behind his juvenile buffoonery. My dashing good looks will distract her from any of my shortcomings. Of which you have many. A tense moment passed before the pair of combatants broke out in raucous laughter, Yuni only sheathing her sword tip in the mud after Varel did. The Whispering Woods was one of the few places where she could laugh like this. Yuni's sanctuary and Varel's break from the constant work on his family's farm. The forest served as a reprieve from the lies they both admitted to wanting to escape. It had become part of their friendship, something she longed for in those times between their clandestine meetings and would forever miss once he was married. How much longer? Varel looked at her with a sidelong glance. When she didn't clarify, he said, Until what, dear mysterious friend? Until you are wed, you thick skull. We're past the time of high sun, so the harvest moon isn't far behind. Surely you only have a few weeks of freedom left. Varel paused, wiping his dagger blade on a hosta leaf. Soon enough, he said, pulling his sword from the muck, cleaning and sheathing it in the leather frog hanging from his belt. The fight had ended, no clear victor. Yuni pulled the double-layer sash she spent the winter making beyond the distrusting gazes of her mother off her back and slid her sword inside. Cinching the sash closed for the return trip home, Yuni drew a deep breath of regret. The longing to continue the session burned in her gut, and she wondered how these times would change once Varel wed. Yuni looked into the crystal sea of the blue above, partially calling on the gods to send favour in her direction. The sun was dripping low. Blasted. It's getting late. I need to go. She threw the sash around her neck and ran to him, hugging him. Thank you for the opportunity to show you who the better fighter is. And then Yuni did something she never thought herself capable. She lightly kissed Varel's cheek and moved away quickly, feeling like her feet weren't even touching the ground, leaving him looking stunned. She laughed at his expression until he looked down and bent toward the mud. Picking up his ego, she smiled, sprinted through the forest, regretting each step. He stood again and yelled something she couldn't hear. Instead, Yuni flicked her chin with her thumb, a sign of disrespect for most people in Farlene, but a secret sign of respect between the two friends, and resumed her run. Whatever Varel needed would have to wait until their next session. Asymmetrical rows of trees passed, and the clearing of empty fields slowly appeared. Soon enough, she would enter her family's cornfield. Each step felt torturous, but if she wanted another opportunity with him, she needed to get home quickly. Yuni was halfway through the corn before thoughts of sparring of Varel began to fade behind the need to plot how to cover her actions if necessary. That was when she noticed the odd feeling of absence. Something wasn't right, something felt off. Her grandmother's amulet, the gilded necklace amulet with a burning, rose-coloured gem in the middle of its teardrop design, was missing. Yuni clutched at her neck as she stopped, spinning around, hoping to see it lying at her feet. When she didn't find it, she retraced her path as far back to the forest as time allowed. The amulet was nowhere. Her grandmother's amulet, her most precious belonging besides her sword, was no longer around her neck, and she didn't have time to search for it. For all she knew, it could be anywhere in the Whispering Woods. Days of searching could pass without her finding it. Later she would go back, for now she had to return home before her parents discovered her. If they haven't already? Yuni choked back the despair of losing the amulet, pulling her hand away from her naked neck, and sprinted as fast as her injured body could carry her. Chapter 2. A Beast's Rage. The last few moments' freedom were filled with panic over her grandmother's amulet. The realization that it was gone erased the serenity brought by dancing still with Varel. The way the wind complemented the chattering of the unseen forest rodents and the sing-song flirting of the birds in its canopy usually brought a peace that lasted for days. And Varel. The Whispering Woods also had him, her trainer, her best friend, and it had her grandmother's amulet. Yuni stopped shy of the end of the field, squatting and surveying the openness that lay between her and the family's modest barn. Her father was nowhere in sight, which meant he could be anywhere. Her mother assuredly was inside, that much was no mystery. She always was. She still had a chance. Clinking from inside the barn. Metal upon metal. Father was occupied repairing shoes for Bailey or another wagon wheel. It mattered not. Yuni had free rein to sneak back into the home undetected again. It might be one of the last times she would need to sneak around when her training sessions with Varel became a thing of the past. She missed him even now, already mourning for their lost friendship. Forget him, Yuni mumbled to herself before dashing across the open fields toward the corner of the home. But it was a lie. As she ran, Yuni knew she would near her deathbed before ever forgetting about Varel. Against the wall, she paused and listened. Muted footsteps slightly scraping across the floorboards sounded from inside as she inched along the wall toward the open window. Standing on her tiptoes, Yuni looked inside. Her mother was on the far side of the large, open downstairs room. Yuni was supposed to be upstairs in the sleeping loft, sewing patchwork on a small pile of her father's clothes. Over the past cycle, she'd trained them to expect her sewing to take hours so she could sneak away to the Whispering Woods. Tressa Tumbravi, leaning over the cooking pot that cast a wonderful smell out the window, even at this distance, was the response Yuni had hoped for. With her mother still unaware, Yuni jumped deftly, bracing herself against the wall with both feet as she scrambled up and into the window without a sound. Halfway through, she paused, checking to make sure that her presence had gone unnoticed. With the swing of her legs, she was inside the home, not drawing her mother's attention. Yuni smiled. This was getting easier all the time. She inched along the handrail. At the bottom of the stairs, she looked across the open room to see Tressa still engaged with the day's meal and raced upstairs to return to her sewing. She tucked the sash containing the training sword underneath her lumpy straw mattress and sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the clothes and stitching that awaited her, unable to suppress her smile, having gotten away with another escape and return. Losing herself in her work, Yuni was halfway through the patchwork when she heard her father's lumbering steps on the front stoop, sounding as if he were bringing the entire herd of cattle into the house with him. "Is the girl upstairs?" he asked from below, giving Yuni pause. The tone in his voice hinted at his displeasure. "I imagine so," Tressa Tumbravi answered. "I've been preparing the meal and I haven't heard a peep from her. She better not be sleeping." Hegiel only grunted in response as his footsteps sounded, crossing the room. Yuni's breath caught at his approach to the bottom of the stairs. It was a natural reaction, one she'd been trained over years of curt, harsh words, ridicule over her work, the pushes and shoves when she didn't move fast enough, the fists. "Girl?" "Yes, father?" A slight thud, skin against wood, his hand on the handrail. "Come downstairs," he ordered, the fading footsteps indicating he was moving away. "Great," she mumbled, setting the pants to the side and her needle carefully atop it. Knowing her luck, Yuni couldn't help but expect this to go poorly enough that she'd get yelled at again for something outside of her control, only to come back up here and poke herself when she returned to her work. She was on her feet and downstairs even as her father was taking his seat at the table. "Yes?" Hegiel sat leaning over the table, his thick arms crossed over each other, as if he were hiding something behind them. The look on his face confirmed the displeased tone in his voice. For the briefest of moments, Yuni was sure he discovered her secret. Her neck warmed under his examination, and she stole a glance at Tressa, but she had her back to them. "Why are your chores not finished?" he asked. Yuni flinched, even though she had prepared herself for being found out one day. But his aggression, the agitated way his eyes twitched, broke her concentration and her guard slipped. She tried and failed to hide her stutter. "I've been working on them." "But you're not done." Somehow, it didn't sound like a question. Tressa still had her back turned, but her pot stirring had ceased. "No." Hegiel sat back, grunted and crossed his arms. Yuni's face flushed. "It's not my fault. Your pants are tricky and I'm having a hard time with them. I'll finish them today, I promise." Yuni jumped when he slammed his fist on the table, rattling the wood. From the kitchen, Tressa squeaked a cry, dropping the large ladle and excusing herself as she cleaned up her mess. Hegiel didn't react to her. "Where have you been, girl?" His eyes gave no hint to the level of his insight into her recent actions. Could he possibly know about her dancing steel? She had been careful, and he had been busy all day. There was no way he would have seen her because the route she took was too well disguised. Yet, in the deeper recesses of her mind, Yuni wasn't assured. "I told you I was—" "Enough!" Hegiel roared, his two hands curling into fists. "You weren't home doing your chores when you were supposed to be, and now you lie to me? You dishonor me again! Where were you? Forget worrying about feeling your mother's apron strings. Be truthful or feel the back of my hand." Yuni sat back, knowing too well how easily he fulfilled the promise of violence in the past and could again whenever he wanted. Her training sessions with Varel were the most important events in her routine, and if she told her father about them, she would surely lose them forever, as bitter a man as he was. But she couldn't lie either. Somehow, he knew she hadn't been upstairs working on the patchwork. Hegiel looked at her as if her very existence disgusted him, his eyes flicking to the bruised wrists she tried to keep covered. "So deceitful, to not even attempt honesty." "I can explain," she replied, trying to hide the whimper creeping up her throat. Tressa was still cleaning her mess, eliminating any hope Yuni had for intervention. But she wouldn't get that chance. Whenever Hegel Tumbravi was on a tirade, the greatest forces of nature couldn't stop him. Everything I've done was to give you what you have so you don't struggle, and this is how you pay respect to me? Your father? You treat me with disdain, you show cow dung, girl. For too long I've taken it too easy on you, a good beating that will teach you. His nose flared and his lips pulled back. Tressa was there suddenly at her husband's side, validating Yuni's fear that this time she had pushed her luck too far. Please, Higel, let the girl return to her work. I've got plenty for her to do. So do you. Let's not spend any more time on this. She rubbed Hegel's round shoulder. Though her words were strong, the voice behind them quavered, setting Yuni on edge. He shrugged away his wife's hands. I'll not have her disobey us, Hegel said, not even looking at his wife. Who knows what she is involved in? I wasn't doing anything. Her father leaned forward. Yuni involuntarily jerked back. You were sneaking around. Her frustration boiled over at the effort she had to go through to dance still for a short time, at Varel for putting her at risk, and at having to sneak into her own home just to be put in the position so she could improve. It was too much. Too suffocating. Yuni threw her hands up in the air. I wouldn't have to if you allowed me at least a bite of freedom. Admission out. Tressa's hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. Yuni swallowed with difficulty, her throat scratching with heat as she awaited her father's reaction. Time slowed, crawling by as he watched her silently. The only sounds coming from him were the low, methodical intakes of breath through his nose. He sounded like a bull feeling threatened. And then his arm was shooting across the table, grabbing Yuni's collar and yanking her forward. I am your father. Unable to breathe, Yuni put her hands to his meaty fist and tried to pull them away. There was no give. Instead, he pulled her closer to his own face, spittle flying on her cheeks as he raged. What child speaks to her father in such a way, as if you have a say in your own life? Who planted these ridiculous ideas in your head? By the gods, let me discover that you have embarrassed me so by sneaking away to see a boy, and you'll get more than the back of my hand. Humiliated in her own home, refused the chance to be around anyone who didn't earn her father's approval. She was rarely allowed to go into Farlene when he went to the market, even though life on this secluded farm was slow and boring, and she struggled to find anyone her age. The closest farm was out of eyesight, and their children were younger and more annoying than anyone Yuni wanted to spend more than an afternoon around. With the locals, it was no secret he controlled every aspect of life here. But to be so vile. The surge of adrenaline she felt all day, from sparring with Varel, to sneaking into the house, to knowing she was in trouble before her father put words to it, rushed back. In that moment, the urge to shout back in his face, to violate him as he was violating her, was irresistible. I'm sure you'd like that, wouldn't you? To finally have the excuse to do something you want to do for a long time? Is that what you like? Tressa gasped. Please, husband, please forgive her. I don't need forgiveness. I did nothing wrong. Hegel was on his feet and moving to the end of the table without releasing Yuni's collar. Towering over her, he yanked her to a standing position in front of him. The rest of the world faded away, dulled in the background. Even Tressa, the woman whose duty it was to protect her, became ambiguous detail. Hegel pressed his face close to hers. One last time, where were you and who were you with? Her heart pounded in her chest, hard enough to beat against her tunic if he hadn't bunched it in his grip. There was a noise somewhere in the background, but Yuni couldn't focus on it. The only thing that mattered was surviving the newest bout of her father's rage. His temper had worsened over the years, growing quicker and more aggressive as the months passed. Tressa blamed it on the failing fields and the stress of the small yields. From the corner of her eye, Yuni saw her mother yelling, but her words were mumbled. The pained look on the other woman's face told it all. Hegel screamed in her face, but his words too sounded like the time cycles past when she was allowed to swim in the local pond with other children from Farlene, and they would talk to each other under the water's surface. Yuni wanted to tell him anything he wanted to hear to make this terror end. In his rage, he would follow through on his promise, and she begged Jenfir to bless her enough to find the voice to appease him. but her throat constricted, her mouth no longer able to move to put words to that which would stop the spiraling event. Another voice, indistinguishable. Her father's bloodshot eyes told her he was beyond reason. Her mother needed to stay away, out of reach. Victims usually come in pairs in the Tumbravi house, but she couldn't warn the older woman away, and her mother was there, reaching for Hegil's arm. In blurred vision, Yuni saw the smaller hands wrap around his thick forearm. Tresha pulled, yanked, her cheeks blotchy as she cried. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She tried to choke out a message, but her throat wouldn't work. "Leave me, woman!" Hegil shouted, not even looking at Tressa as he shoved her away while still holding Yuni by the tunic. "This is a father's duty." The wool was being cinched around her neck by the force of his fists. Moving her hands to her collar, Yuni pulled at the material to create a gap, to rip it if need be out of fear of being choked. Tressa moved closer, again pulling at his arms. Small pinpricks of light, tiny infinitesimal circles, flashed in her field of vision. One popped into existence and blinked away just as she caught it, only for another to replace it in a different spot, almost instantaneously. Yuni's head suddenly felt heavy, barely able to keep it upright. "Please," she croaked. The world began to fade, and Yuni feared what would happen to Varel when he learned that they never got to say goodbye. She blinked slowly, as if she had to pry her eyelids open again. Waking, the urge to vomit was instant, but all she could do was choke. The single point of focus of her vision widened, bringing in more of the world around her, and then narrowed again quickly. If she could breathe, she would surely empty her stomach. The first thing she saw was her father's face. He was screaming indecipherable words at her mother. Her head fell to her chest, but she snapped it back up, forcing her eyes wider and swinging her arm toward Tressa. In her father's rage, he wouldn't see how desperately in trouble she was, but her mother might, if she could get the pair of them to stop screaming at each other. But she missed with the first swing, and then the second. Yuni wasn't sure she had the strength to swing a third time. As a world darkened, Hegil's head snapped forward again, but he wasn't looking at her. His eyes were trained on something behind her. And then the pressure around her neck vanished when his hands opened. He pulled away. As Yuni fell to her knees, almost hitting her head on the table, the world rushed back in a blur of vision and a cacophony of violence. Her mother was screaming, her father was yelling, and so was someone else. In a flash of movement, from the corner of her eye, a blur swept through the modest home. Now, not a blur, Yuni thought, a person. Varel! Something flickered off the fading orange glow of the sunlight creeping into the house as Varel was there in between her and her father. "Stop this madness!" he was yelling, arms extended towards Hegil. A gold chain with something attached dangling from Varel's fist. The amulet! Her grandmother's amulet. Not only had Varel found it, but he brought it to her, here to intervene before her father killed her. She was grateful to him and to Huneta, the god of divine intervention. "Get out of my way, boy!" Tressa had both her arms around Hegil's, which ended in a fist. "Please, darling, please stop this." "Leave her be," Varel said, glancing over his shoulder at Yuni, who was only now attempting to get back to her feet. "Are you okay?" Unsteady, she pushed herself up and nodded, lacking the energy to do anything more. Ever so slowly, the spots in her vision disappeared, but she was still dizzy and her breaths were coming in rapid succession. "Boy, take your leave," Hegil said, the corners of his mouth white with saliva. "Please, please go," Tressa begged, holding her husband. Varel retreated closer to Yuni. "I'll go, but I'm taking her with me." Hegil stepped closer, his fist still clenched. She reached for Varel with the full intention of pulling him from the home. She could get through this even if this beating was severe because she had in the past, but she couldn't promise peaceful resolution for her best friend. "The gods be damned before you do that, boy," Hegil said. Another step. "Stop, father, please." It took everything she had just to beg once again. "I'll take him out. Varel, come on." Yuni put a hand on Varel's shaking arm. From fear or adrenaline, she did not know, but she'd never known Varel to not be courageous. They made eye contact, and in the look they shared, a calm began to take hold. His eyes could be so cruel when they trained, vicious and unrelenting, but now they were soft and kind, pools of monochrome brown she could expose every secret to. "Okay," Varel answered in a shaky voice. Yuni backed away. "I will see him out, and then I'll accept my discipline." "As if I can trust a lying little bitch like you," Hegil said with such ferocity that she knew her friend wasn't safe here. "Is this him? Is this who you've been sneaking around with behind our backs? The Nuwu boy? Betrothed to another, aren't you? Yet here you are in my home, dragging my daughter to every corner of Allidor. For what business? Unseemly business, that's what. It's obvious I need to teach you how to respect." They had taken a few steps away from the table, but were still close enough for her lunge at Varel and grab him as his mud-sodden boots stomped on the floor like he intended to break the planks. Tugging on Varel, pulling him toward the door, she shouted, "Come on!" He was yanked out of her hand. Hegil had her best friend's arm in his meaty hands. "I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget, boy." "No!" Tressa screeched, her hands to her cheeks as she gave up at attempting to pull back her husband. He grabbed Varel's shirt, just as he had Yuni's, bunching it in a fist. Varel, shorter, was forced to lean backward as he looked into the eyes of her out-of-control father. "You will learn respect," Hegil said with a snarl, pulling back his balled fist and sending it forward. Varel turned his head even as he fought to pull himself free. It connected, not fully, but with enough impact to rock Varel sideways. Yuni moved toward the fight, but not before another punch landed. Then another, this one sending Varel reeling. He wobbled for a few feet before falling against the support pole, nearly cracking his head open. His hand went to his bloodied nose. Yuni was in shock at what she saw. He would never get violent with someone outside the home because that would expose their family secret. "What are you doing?" But Hegil wasn't hearing her. He had only eyes for the prone Varel, stomping past her, not even bothering to glance in her direction. She pulled on his arm to stop him, and he sent a backhand to the side of her face that knocked her to the floor. "Blasted," Varel said, wiping blood from his nose with the back of his sleeve and getting to his feet before Hegil was on him. He drew his training sword from the leather frog. Her father looked at the sword and jerked with a hostile laugh. "Not even man enough to draw real steel." But Hegil didn't laugh for long. Varel swung, connecting with the larger man's left shoulder. He yelled out, placing a hand to the spot that would surely bruise by tomorrow. "We're leaving," Varel said, holding the sword at the ready between them and attempting to circle his opponent. "The devils you are!" Hegil snapped, stomping closer while holding his newly injured shoulder and trying to hide his wince. Varel bobbed the tip of his wooden sword up and down as Yuni moved to him. "Sir, I don't want to hurt you." Hegil stuttered in his step. It wasn't fear in his eyes, but unbridled rage. "With that," he cackled, pointing at Varel's weapon, "I'm going to shatter your bones, boy." And then he was in Varel before her friend could defend himself. Yuni watched helplessly as Hegil lowered his shoulder and barreled into Varel, tackling him at the waist and bringing both of them down to the floor. The larger man was on top, straddling Varel. He threw vicious punches, one blow after another. Underneath Varel's grunts and groans was the sick sound of skin meeting skin, fat hand against solid skull. "He'll kill him," Yuni realized. She raced to her father and wrapped her arm around his neck, pulling backward. But he was too big, too solid for her to budge. Her attempt at pulling him off her best friend didn't even slow his punches. She turned to her mother. "Help me!" But Tressa stood where she was when all this started, on the other side of the table, her hands to her mouth and her eyes wide in shock fear. Yuni turned back, wrapping her arm tighter, trying to wedge it underneath his chin. She gripped her wrist with her other hand and pulled, hoping to create some leverage. Focused as she was on pulling her father off, she couldn't see Varel's condition, but she was close enough to hear the impact of her father's fist and the lack of reaction from her best friend. He was in trouble and the assault wasn't near finished. Tears blinded her, even as rage blinded her father. Helpless, hopeless, she pulled and pulled, but he wouldn't budge. The attack didn't cease. Clearer than before, Yuni realized that her father's rage would only be sated if he killed her best friend. Yuni got to her feet, backing away. She was hopeless without the tools to help a friend who had always been there for her, a friend who knew how important it was for her to train with swords while never understanding the true reason why until this moment. Standing uselessly in the middle of her home, listening as her father's attack pushed her best friend further into unconsciousness and likely closer to death, she shook. Her own rage mixed with helplessness, the fire fueled by despair. Inside, she felt it move. A force, unrelenting, surging forward. It couldn't be stopped, and Yuni didn't want it stopped by anything or anyone. This was the same she'd felt sparring with Varel, the same she'd felt dozens of times during earlier beatings by her father. Energy built inside, filling her, every inch of skin, each extremity. Yuni felt as if she was going to burst, a power surging within that she could no longer deny. She reached out, fingers extended. She let the power come roll through her, letting it touch every part of her to fill her. It was there, demanding release, and Yuni satisfied it, unleashing desperation on her father. Unsure of what she was tapping into, the power left her body and crossed the room to her father, shooting through the air in a nearby transparent wave as if outlined by the clearest water. It snaked toward him in an instant. Hegel never saw it coming. Her mother never shouted or reacted. When it struck, Yuni wasn't sure anything had happened. He didn't explode in a ball of flame, nor was he propelled into the wall. The power didn't send him into shock, and his attack wasn't slowed. Punch after punch still crashed down into Varel's face. Whatever she had felt, whatever surged through her had done nothing. After years of teasing her with its presence, and only after she tapped into it, did it reveal itself as nothing more than her imagination, a mockery of the gods, cruel as they could be. She was out of options. She couldn't physically pull her father off Varel, and he was intent on killing her friend. Whatever she thought she could do was only fancy, wishful, and listless thinking. Useless. Yuni looked around the kitchen. The ladle her mother used to stir the dinner they would not eat now sat along the counter. Yuni ran to it, snagging it and racing back toward her father, half aware that the ladle wasn't heavy enough to do true damage. Unlike him, she didn't want to hurt, she just wanted this to stop. As she neared her father, raising it to strike, her attack was preempted as Hegel toppled over to the floor, limp, as if already unconscious. The room fell silent. What happened? Tressa asked, still not approaching. Yuni crept closer, hovering over him. He didn't move. I don't know. She got on her knees and grabbed his broad shoulder to pull him over even as Varel began to stir. Hegel was unconscious and unmoving, and blood ran from him, from his nose and the corner of his mouth, from his ears too. Even his eyes trickled crimson justice. Suddenly tired, Yuni stifled a scream and backed away, moving to her friend. He was bloodied but conscious. When she helped him sit up, he groaned, holding his head. Careful, she whispered as she put her hands to his cheeks where welts already raised. Varel tried to pull himself up and swooned. I'm sorry, Yuni. I tried to stop him. His voice was weak. She wiped the trickle of blood from the corner of his eyes that had drained into his jet-black hair, matting it. After a moment, she helped him to his feet. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. If it weren't for you, he would have hurt me. Bad Varel. He was in a rage. You saved me. It is me who should apologize. Let me help you home. Your mother will want to look at you. He winced, unable to stand erect. I'll hitch the wagon. You're in no condition to walk home. You'll be lucky to even ride. Yuni turned, ready to tell her mother she was leaving, and saw Tressa remained standing at the other side of the table, unmoving, as if in a trance, stunned by what had occurred. She didn't even move to help her husband. Her eyes found Yuni's. No, child, you can't be one. It cannot be. By Allidor's eyes, not my child, Tressa said, her voice pitched in oncoming hysteria. Her mother's reaction scared her nearly as much as her father's rage. The look in Tressa's eyes was one of repulsion mixed with fear. Varel needed her now. There was no time to delay, no time to think about what she had done to her father. Yuni wrapped Varel's arm around her neck and turned toward the door. Lean on me. Let me help you. I found your necklace, Varel groaned as she took him outside to the wagon. Yes, you did, she said. Her gratitude felt empty. The heirloom was important to her, but not at this cost. Nothing was worth what had just happened. Nothing is worth what I just did. Chapter 3. Enemies. Crickets. Thousands upon thousands of insignificant insects going about their normal lives in the vast fields outside her home in the darkness, they thrived. Yuni lay quietly on her mattress, listening to them, wondering what it would be like to be so free. Would she ever know? Inconsequential or not, the songs of the insects drowned out her father's ragged breathing from the other side of the room. She had taken Varel home, and was quickly dismissed by the Nuru family so they could focus on their son. She returned to discover her father in bed, her mother by his side as if he were the most precious commodity that needed protecting from the world. Whatever Yuni had done to him, she hadn't meant to kill him, only stop him, so she was relieved to see that he was suffering, but alive. It would be days before he was healthy enough to give her consequences for what she'd done. Neither woman spoke to each other. Yuni because she didn't know what to say, and Tressa because she was busy tending to her husband and shooting frightened glances at her daughter. So she spent the rest of the evening taking care of the animals and eating alone. The quiet peace was so blissful until she had to lay feet away from them, listening to her father's recovery. "You can't be," her mother had said when Yuni hurried to remove Varel from her father's presence. "You can't be." They never had the chance to discuss what Tressa meant, although Yuni had her suspicions. Things of legend and fairy tales. She had cast a blood spell. Without knowledge of how, she tapped into something that was the fancy of tavern drunks. The type of stories the farming community entertained themselves with when passing the long, cold nights of the white months. It wasn't supposed to be real. Yet, what else could explain what she'd done? As night stretched on and the crickets continued their songs, Yuni realized their peace would never be shared. Varel was the only one who understood. He was her salvation from misery. With no one to talk to now, Yuni had never felt so scared and alone. Then it sank on her like an invisible weight. This torture wouldn't end, not at Varel's recovery or even her father's forgiveness, of which he was completely incapable. Whatever she had done to stop his attack, she was sure she would pay for it for the rest of her life. So, it was in the middle of the night when darkness blanketed the world that Yuni took her fate in her own hands. Rolling out of bed quietly, she slid her sash from its hiding place and sneaked Higio's satchel from the peg on the wall near where her parents slept. She stuffed it with 2 tunics and pants, enough to have something dry to change into without signalling her absence to her parents when they woke. Deftly, she crept down the stairs to the bottom floor, still undetected, even as she dug through the sacks of dried provisions, filling the rest of her satchel. At the door, she pulled her cloak from the wall peg, donning it quickly, carefully opened the door, and ran out into the night. She didn't stop to saddle Bailey because that would take too long, and the noise might alert her mother. This was her only chance to break free. 100 paces down the uneven road, Yuni paused, looking over her shoulder. In the pale moonlight, she took a final look at her home, unsure it ever was one. Framed in by the cold night, she felt nothing for the structure that promised pain and anguish if she ever stepped inside it again. Turning forward again, Yuni allowed herself to be swallowed by the darkness. Allidor held a chill at night, even during the summer months. Tonight it promised only more agony for the young woman hiding in the night's embrace. As she crouched, staring at the Nuru home, Yuni wondered if her decision had been wise at all. Now it seemed more desperate than anything she'd ever done, including saving her best friend from her father. In the middle of the night, the Nuru family slept. She had been so focused on escaping the torture of her own life, she hadn't stopped to think that they wouldn't be awake at this hour to receive her. A small, wretched laugh escaped at the thought of dying on her pursuit of freedom outside her best friend's home. Yuni crossed the yard toward the barn. It felt wrong, doing so without permission, but she had to survive the night, and using the shelter wouldn't harm anyone. The walls and hayloft would keep her from freezing, plus the Nuru family were good people and would understand her plight. The barn was cold, but it dulled the bite of the night air. Her presence did not disturb the sleeping animals who rested in their stalls. Yuni was grateful for that as she searched for the ladder to the loft. Finding it, she climbed its rungs and buried herself in the loose hay, falling into a fitful sleep. Come the morning, she could begin to rectify her mistakes. Sounds of life woke her. Nothing subtle and peaceful, allowing for a smooth transition into the world of the waking. The metallic ringing of steel against anvil pulling Yuni from her slumber. Varlell's family was awake. She sat and stretched, not sure if she was ready for the day ahead. It started with the first apology for her father's actions. After that, she would worry about how to ask to stay with them. First things first. She collected her belongings quietly and descended the ladder, calculating her approach to Varlell's father at his anvil. Yuni crept toward the barn entrance. In the yard, Uta Nuru worked on horseshoes. Squinting against the brightness of the rising sun, she approached cautiously, not wanting to receive a hammer blow to the side of the head for shocking him. She had known Uta for most of her life, although they rarely saw one another. Yesterday being the first time in weeks she'd laid eyes on his family. Friend or not, Uta glowered at the horseshoe pinned to the anvil. "Sir?" she called out. He didn't respond or react, lost in the rhythmic pounding of his work. Yuni repeated her call, this time louder. "Sir?" Uta nearly jumped, spinning with the hammer raised. She stepped back even though she was out of his reach, her heart racing. For a moment, his face was replaced with that of her father. Yuni blinked away the vision. "You," Uta said in a low voice, his face twisted in a pained grimace. "What are you doing here?" Yuni noticed how he rotated the hammer in his hand. "I came to check on Varlell." His scowl deepened. "I have every right to beat your ass here where you stand. Do you realize that?" She only wanted to ensure Varlell was resting and recovering. The thought that his father would want to claim retribution never crossed her mind. Uta Nuru wasn't that kind of man. They weren't that kind of family. "Coming to check on him, as if you have the right," Uta said, raising the hammer horizontally and pointing toward his home. "My boy slept through the evening only by the will of the gods. Uta's mouth twisted as if he was fighting off a sudden cry. His breathing had been ragged and his sleep restless. His mother tended to him all evening, praying to Elfane for the boy to make it to the morn. I didn't think she slept a wink. And you come here to see if he's okay? By Allidor's eyes, child, of course he's not okay. What your father did, God damn him, is the worst insult a man could give another. To lay hands on my son, to beat him so severely. You're lucky I'm a better man than he." Yuni cast her eyes down at the dirt. She spoke softly. "I know you are. And I apologize to my father. It's my fault he acted like he did." Silence followed her apology. The farm animals, the sheep, the pair of dogs intent on harassing them, fully disinterested in what was transpiring on the small patch of flattened mud in the northwest corner of Far Lane. She didn't even look up when she heard his slow, rhythmic steps approaching. Yuni tried to stifle the shiver that ran through her when Uta put a hand on her shoulder. "Varlell told me what happened, child. Everything. From the secret sword training to how you lost your amulet. He told me about what he heard when he got to your home. By the gods, no woman should have to live like that. The apology is not yours to give. That is your father's, and it would serve him best if he stayed away from me and my family for the rest of his life. I fear what I will do if I see him. But," he gave her shoulder a squeeze halfway between affection and firmness, "he's not the only Tumbravi I don't want to see again. You may not understand this now, but you will one day, when you have children of your own. To be clear, you are not welcome here any more, Yuni. Don't come to see my son. Don't come to check on him until he recovers or after he does. Don't come asking to dance still. The time for your friendship has ended. May the gods treat you well on the rest of your journey, child. But the journey is yours to take, without Varlell." "Now," he said, inhaling through his nose, "best be off with you." Yuni stepped back, eyes wide. Forbidden from seeing Varlell ever again? She had done nothing wrong. This wasn't her fault. Yet her fate was to pay the worst punishment imaginable? Her life without Varlell? Why were the gods so cruel? Was she to forever pay for her father's crimes? In desperation, she protested. "Sir, I care about him. Sir, I care about him." The words came out as easily as a hand slid over rusted metal. "He's my best friend. What you ask of me, it's not fair. And neither is what was done to my son. I know, but I didn't. Then you will understand why you need to stay away. My son told me everything you did." The way Uta said the word, Yuni knew that he said it with deeper implications. "Everything?" Uta glanced back toward the house with a wary look. "He told me what you did to your father, and how it frightened your mother so." The memories rushed forward in a whirlwind, the moment of helpless rage as Varlel was beaten, the boiling power within her she somehow projected at her father. The power that made him bleed, the power that she could have used to— "Sir, I saved his life, your son." Uta nodded. "Aye, you did. But you are a risk. Your kind are dangerous. Wherever you go, child, it won't be here. But watch where your feet land. Farlene won't take kindly to your presence once word spreads about what you are." What, not who? Before Yuni could ask what he meant or protest that she didn't have a kind, a shriek rose from the house. She turned to see Varlel's mother on the stoop, shaking a fist and crying. "You best be leaving," Uta said, his head dipped toward her but his eyes measuring his wife. "His mother won't be as kind as I have been. Can I just— Gods, go, child," he said, slapping the hammer against his open palm. "But I— Be gone, you devil, be gone!" Varlel's mother was stepping down from the stoop, her skirts pulled up so she could move more quickly. Uta back towards his anvil. "I told you, I've been kinder than she will be, and I will not interfere in a mother's justice." There could be no positive ending to this situation now. If she resisted, her presence would only do more harm to Varlel than she had already done. Scrapping with his pained mother in the middle of a muddy yard would not help his recovery nor bring peace to this family that so deserved it. For Varlel, she had to do the right thing, but doing so was the most difficult thing in the world. Adjusting her sash and hefting her satchel, Yuni dipped her head to Uta and raced away from the one sense of hope she had in the world. Each step was quicker than the last as Varlel's mother pursued her. Quicker than a rooster's crow, Yuni put safety between herself and the farm, even as her heart shattered. "At least I'm not shivering," Yuni said to herself. The sun was still high. Midday meal, she estimated. The air had grown warm hours earlier as she headed south, away from Farlene. With nothing to judge against, she'd guessed she'd put 10 miles between her and the village. Her feet ached because she wore soft shoes. The only thing she could find was sneaking from her home in the darkness. They weren't made for long walking, nor the uneven road surface this far into the countryside. A permanent sweatband stained her tunic underneath the sash that contained her wood sword, and she had to keep switching which side of her belt she hung her satchel from to stave off a one-sided limp. Misery piled on misery the further she walked, without a reprieve in sight. The road leaving Farlene soon exposed a new world, flat and brown. The closest tree sat on the edge of her view. She passed the time by disparaging herself with thoughts of choosing the summer season to launch this new fate. Unprepared for a long journey, Yuni wasn't sure what she was going to do or how she was going to do it if she didn't find another village soon. She had no coin, little food, and finding water would become a concern at some point. But living her entire life in Farlene, what lay outside the village extended to knowledge of only the significant places in Allidor, such as the Salt Sea and Forsaken Forest. Even Landor, supposedly the grandest city in the world, was a mystery, even if it served as her salvation. Such foolishness, thinking she could reach Landor in a single day. Within the span of less than half a day, Allidor had proved itself larger than she could have dreamed, and doubt began creeping in that she would be able to do this. Over the next few hours, her footsteps became more laboured, each requiring more effort than the last. Yuni tried to focus on the goal of getting as far away from Farlene and the nightmares it held as she could. The aim was sometimes the only thing that helped her lift her leg for another hopeless step. "I'm such a fool," she said. Her own voice sounded scratchy in her ears. "It's usually a sign one has spent too much time in the sun when one talks to themselves," a strange feminine voice said. Yuni jumped, trying to pull her sash off her shoulder. Behind her, A woman with long blonde hair wrapped into a tail pulled to the side of her head sat on the driver's bench of a large covered wagon drawn by 2 horses, both of which looked sturdy. The wagon's canvas rippled in the hot wind and was coated in a growing layer of dust. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you," Yuni said, taking a slight step backward. Had it been bandits, they would have robbed her without having to sneak up on her. "I didn't mean to block the road." The woman pulled the wagon alongside Yuni, pulling on the reins, signalling the horses to stop. Closer now, she was young for someone to be travelling with such an impressive wagon and horses. Yuni imagined, together, the horses were worth her family's home. She was possibly in her early 30s. With a large nose that made her cheekbones disappear beneath its breadth, her skin could be light in another situation, but appeared to have a permanent layer of golden colour from the sun. Sun or dust, her skin marked her as someone who had spent their life outdoors. The woman's blue eyes twinkled as the pair examined each other. She looked Yuni up and down before turning to the side as if she were expecting someone. "What are you doing out here alone?" "Travelling." The woman raised an eyebrow. "I'm a traveller," she said, tilting her head backward towards her wagon. "I have transportation, horses, and if I need it, cover. You're out here far from any settlement, and by the looks of things, you're lucky to have provisions on you." Yuni pinned her satchel to her body protectively. "I have provisions." The woman threw her head back and laughed. Yuni didn't see humour in the situation and slowly shifted her sash down her arm, her hand moving toward her sword. "That's funny, girl. What's your name?" Yuni locked eyes with the woman instead of answering, hoping the confrontation would keep her distracted long enough to retrieve the sword. She hadn't come this far to be robbed by the midday meal. The traveller gave her a quizzical look before repeating her question more kindly this time. "Whatever you're running from, I promise to not betray you. I'm just curious because, honestly, you're putting yourself at great risk by being out here. There are too many stories of people being caught out in bad situations like this because they weren't cautious when travelling. I would hate to see misfortune fall on your shoulders. What can I call you?" What would it hurt to offer that information? If she connected with the woman, maybe she could also curry a favour or two, preferably in the form of water and food. "Yuni," she answered softly. The woman nodded as if it had been a test of honesty. "Well, Yuni, my name is Klessi Kargon. I'm a merchant headed to Allidor. Want a ride?" The woman gestured at the bench seat. Yuni took an involuntary step backward, and when Klessi laughed again, she asked the traveller, "What's so funny?" Klessi smiled smartly. "You?" "Me?" "Yes. You don't have many options, yet you're resistant to help. It's obvious you lack experience because you seem completely unaware of how dangerous the night will be out here. I know exactly how many homesteads are between here and Allidor, if indeed that is where you're headed. You won't have shelter, that I promise you. Basically, I'm the only thing between you and a very uncomfortable night, one that might include harm or even death." Death? Yuni's throat constricted. Within a day her life had unravelled. This was all spiralling so fast. Klessi waved at the open expanse behind Yuni. "It may not look like much now, but come the night, animals prowl these lands. Hungry animals. You look like you can handle yourself a little, but I'm not sure you're ready to face the beasts of these plains." Yuni turned quickly, as if something was already approaching. This woman was in her head, making her think things, but she might be telling the truth. What did Klessi have to gain if Yuni joined her on the journey to Allidor? What did she have to lose if she didn't accept the merchant's offer? "You wouldn't mind? I wouldn't want to intrude. And I would not be able to rest tonight. Somewhat comfortably in an inn, I might add, if I leave you out here. Crazy as it might sound, I need to try everything I can convince you it's to your benefit to travel to Allidor with me. It would take another 2 days to get there." "By wagon?" she asked, surprised. Klessi pinched her lips. "And now you understand my concern why you tried to do this by foot." Yuni found the scuffed dirt beneath her feet. Wood creaked as Klessi slid across her driver's bench. She tapped the empty space beside her. "Please," the merchant said, her face taking an elderly quality. "Join me. Whatever you're running from, you must have good reasons. Let me help." Yuni nodded and pulled the sash from her shoulder, giving her satchel a jerk. Where do you want me to put these? You'll have to hold them in your lap. I'm sorry, but Clessie jerked her head with a backward nod. The wagon is full of goods for the market in Allidor. No space. Thank you for this, she said, climbing to the bench. Good to her word, Clessie got them to Allidor 2 days later. The city, seeming to stretch across the entire horizon, slowly came into view hours before they reached it. Her impression, a childlike fascination, would be hers alone. Farlene was always exciting, and it was a simple village without walls. What lay before her now was incomprehensible. Impressive, isn't it? Clessie asked. It's huge, Yuni said, her voice wispy with fascination. How many people live there? Clessie shrugged. I can't be sure, but I imagine a few 100,000. In the years I spent coming to this city, I still haven't seen all of it. A fascinating place. You will love it. Plenty of opportunity for a courageous young woman like you. Yuni snorted, feeling Clessie's eyes on her before she spoke. Why do you react like that? Do you not think yourself courageous? Not at all, Yuni said honestly. I'm a coward. If the opposite were true, She struggled for the word. What could she call Varlau now that his family had barred her from ever seeing him again? My friend wouldn't have gone through what he did. Though they had spent 2 days together, Yuni didn't reveal her reasons for fleeing Farlene, and Clessie had the good judgment not to inquire. Instead, the merchant filled their journey by regaling her with tales of her travels and the opportunities that existed in places like Allidor, even for a young woman. She stressed that point often. Whatever happened, it's easy to blame ourselves, especially if we have a good soul. I've done that to myself 100 times over in just the past month. We blame ourselves long before the culprits in our stories. Can I give you some advice? Of course. Clessie, her hands on the horse's reins, took her eyes from Yuni to fall back on the vast city of Allidor as if it were a person lurking in the shadows at night. It takes a courageous person to carve a life for themselves in this city. The fact that you set your own journey shows me that you have the courage of 10 soldiers. Allidor can be a marvellous place, one which might bring you all the dreams you have. But it can also be a dangerous place, especially for young women. Be wary, and always be smart. You do those things and you'll be fine. But be careful who you trust. I will. Yuni felt compelled to promise. The city continued to loom on the horizon until it was in front and above them. Its high walls leaned over the world around it. Yuni looked up, amazed at how their height made the few guards on the parapet look so insignificant, almost too small to be human. They rode through the city gate, the echo of the wagon wheels coming back toward them from the curved grey stone above, and into the main street. Allidor looked like Farlene on this side of the wall, where its houses were crammed together, one on top of another, but that was where the commonalities ended. This street was cobblestone and broad, enough so that 4 wagons could be driven side by side. The city's sounds were rich, not only here, but as they passed block after block, as daily Allidoran life drifted toward them. Laughter, songs, drunken shouts, wives ridiculing husbands, children playing. Yuni's skin bristled from the city's life. There are so many people, she said, astounded. Only moments into the city, and she had already seen 100 times the people she had ever seen in Farlene. And lots of coin to be made for them, if you're smart, Clessie smirked. After a while, she turned the wagon down another street, half as broad as the one they had just exited, but bigger than anything in Farlene. A few blocks ahead, it opened into a massive square filled with red canvas awnings over stalls situated close together in the middle. Through the smaller alleys between the stalls, people of Allidor milled about. Wagons, dozens of wagons, many as fine as Clessie's, but many more half as impressive, lined the square, almost completely encircling it. Welcome to the market, Clessie said with a grand gesture that made Yuni laugh the first time in what felt like an eternity. 3 days. It had only been 3 days since Varlau was bruising her wrist and she was leading him into an assault at the hands of her father. 3 days since she had touched a power she didn't know she had. 3 days since her life had changed forever, and it could have been another lifetime. Clessie pulled the wagon to one of the few open spaces and climbed down to hitch the horses before moving to the rear. Yuni collected her meagre belongings and joined the merchant. "Can I help?" Clessie shook her head. "This will take several hours. Unlike the rest of these boneheads, I don't park in one place and then lug these wares to the different stalls. After I deliver one, I'll keep moving. No sense in making this more work than it needs to be, right? The men think it's because I'm weak. I know it's because I'm smarter than them. I'll be drinking in a tavern while most of my peers are still out here, unloading, even the ones who arrived before us. No, I appreciate your offer, but I don't need help. You will have enough to do to get settled in before evening. Do that as soon as you can. This may not be the countryside, but you won't want to be caught out in the street. Find someplace safe." Clessie reached into the pocket of her pants and pulled out a small canvas pouch, handing it to Yuni. "Take this." She did, but, feeling its weight, the humiliation burned intensely. She knew what it was, from how heavy it was to the way it jingled. I can't. I don't deserve this." Clessie never looked at her after handing over the small bag of coins. "Nor did you deserve whatever happened to you. I wish I could do more, but I'm struggling. Being a merchant is a fine profession unless you're a woman. I wish I could do more, but I have to be careful with my coin. You need that small amount more than I do. Starting life in Allidor with just those belongings," Clessie dipped her head toward Yuni's satchel and sash, "will be difficult enough. If for no other reason, consider that the gods may finally smile on me now." Her voice turned dark. "There are very few in Allidor willing to give and not take." Chapter 4. Streets of Allidor. Yuni lay on the bed, never wanting to get out of it. The mattress was filled with feathers. Hay and wool were staples of comfort back home. Who could afford to stuff mattresses with feathers? Apparently, in Allidor. The nights since arriving in Allidor had been the most restful of her life. Whether that peaceful rest came from the separation from her abusive father or the mattress, Yuni did not know, nor did she care to dwell on the question. Mostly because she enjoyed this new life's freedom, but also because its days were coming to an end. She rolled over and grabbed the coin pouch from the stand. It was far too light. Clessie's kindness had given her a lead on life in this large city, but it wasn't an endless kindness. The coin was nearly exhausted and, to make matters worse, Yuni hadn't found any of those wonderful opportunities Clessie talked up during the journey to the city. Allidor, it seemed, was even harsher than the merchant had warned. Desperation came not from her lack of desire, but of chance, misfortune, and apathy. She wasn't the most skilled labourer in the city, but she did have redeeming qualities and knew her way around a variety of tools, and she was a hard worker. Yet the type of work city life required was vastly different from the farm. Its schedule was much different too. People here woke later than she had ever on the farm, even the days she was ill, and there wasn't a rush to meet the feeding demands of dozens of animals. Here, people woke and stayed up later, the city's wealth of entertainment keeping them out on its streets and in its taverns much too late to wake at a reasonable hour. Street musicians filled the city with melodious songs that were often accompanied by the slurring singing of drunken tavern patrons as the nights stretched the following mornings. Allidor was a foreign world with plenty of joy and coin for thousands, but since arriving, the city seemed reluctant to give Yuni a chance to prove her worth. The innkeeper, Grisla Inhera, was a tough woman. Widowed a decade ago, she owned the Boar's Head Inn since losing her husband. None of her children were alive to help, the woman said, but she managed on her own just fine. The Boar's Head was an immaculate inn that served tasty food to a constant stream of patrons, and Grisla was ever present. If she wasn't cooking, she was cleaning. When she wasn't doing those things, she could be found tossing inebriated patrons into the street when they ran out of coin. Grisla was an example of what was possible and even displayed a sense of humour from time to time. One thing she was above all others was a good businesswoman, even stripping away her kindness when the conditions called for it, such as when Yuni had asked for a job. Grisla told her the same thing each time. She said, "Too many girls," the innkeeper would say. "Can't afford another and I can't cut any of them free. They're good girls." She never offered an apology that she couldn't hire someone when she was earning healthy coin from, even as Yuni grew desperate over her quickly emptying coin pouch. 2 more nights, Yuni said, tossing the pouch back to the nightstand. Enough coin for 2 nights, with meals included, unless she talked Griezler into finally hiring her. Yuni's eyes fell to the satchel in the corner. The bag held food from the past few meals, only the portions that would not spoil, in anticipation of meals at the inn stopping if Griezler didn't change her mind. Blowing out her candle, Yuni tried to fall into a fitful sleep, accompanied by problematic thoughts of the last chance she was going to take with the inn's owner. As it turned out, she need not worry about Griezler finally giving her an opportunity to earn a wage. Sorry, child, no. You might be good on a farm, but you're no good to me here. Men pay for mead, but they pay double if a pretty girl brings it to them. And you, Griezler's eyes slid to Yuni's auburn hair, won't ever see double the coin. That hair will mark you as a foreigner until you shave it, and those eyes are hard to look at. I'm sorry, girl, but no. Best you find something that suits your skills or go back home. The conversation happened on the day her coin ran out. I can't afford another night's stay. Griezler stopped salting the slab of pork that would serve as the evening's meal for the patrons who could afford it, taking in Yuni with a sympathetic gaze. That is unfortunate, child. I did enjoy having you around. Yuni tried to keep her breathing slow, but her cheeks burned. Is there nothing you can do? I have nowhere else to go. Griezler returned her attention to the meat. If only I could. But the rooms need to stay full if I'm going to keep a roof over my head and a livelihood for the girls. The church gives charity, not me, girl. Girl. The word her father used to refer her to. Yuni blinked in a stupor, backing away, but Griezler didn't notice, focused on the pork as she was. I'll find something and I'll pay you on time. I'll make up for whatever I miss as soon as I find an opportunity. Yuni's voice sounded mumbled in her own ears. Come back and see me when you do. It'll be nice to have you around again. The words were flat, listless. So that was that then. What did she do now? She'd spent so much time trying to convince Griezler to keep her in the room, and all her other time scurrying around Allidor looking for someone to take her on, and she still had not met anyone useful. No Varel, no Clessy, no foundation the inn, the staff, or its patrons had become. Alone. Truly alone. Frightened, the nagging worry that the worst was still to come accompanied Yuni when she packed her belongings and moved out of the inn. Griezler was too busy fawning over a new customer to be bothered with the fact that Yuni was leaving. Some of the women wished her well, but Yuni had a feeling they were doing so with the knowledge that, well, was as good as life would be for Landor's newest resident. Yuni never knew cold like she learned over the next few weeks as summer began relinquishing its crown to autumn. The days were still comfortably warm. Yuni used that to her advantage to scour the city for a tradesman who needed an assistant, but it was the nights that stopped her from seriously considering heading outside the walls to find a farmer who might take her on. Each night, as darkness descended, the chill crept across Allidor, wrapping it in its cloak. And the days and nights were only going to get colder and colder. Without coin, Yuni could not pay for shelter, and that which she found was always in a shared space. Any goodwill towards their fellow human was difficult to come across in the city. At first, Yuni stayed near the Boar's Head. The inn served as an anchor for her in an intimidating city where she knew no one and had no one to count on. That changed one day when a patron complained about Yuni hanging around in the alley. At that, Griezler had treated Yuni as she did any other vagabond, shooing her from the property with the threat of bringing the city guard around if the girl returned. Yuni never saw Griezler again. Over the next weeks, Yuni got smarter about how to hide from Landor's permanent residents, those with enough in their favour to live in homes and not its alleyways. She found stables, even coming across one that kept her warm for nearly a week. Before long, like each time the gods gave her a reprieve from struggle, misfortune visited in the form of stable hands. They discovered her presence and she was on the street again. The alleys were always dangerous, serving as the home to many of Landor's homeless. Yuni quickly realised she didn't have the acumen to survive them. Her first night sleeping in one and able to fall asleep, she witnessed no less than 5 scuffles, 2 of which resulted in the stabbing, 1 with a quick murder. Soon she discovered she was not fit for any kind of living. No matter where she went, she struggled to stay warm, find food, or not cross the path of a property owner looking for an excuse to bash someone's head in. Hunger and cold were her only companions. Every day became a struggle in surviving until the next sunrise, waiting for it to rise to its zenith. Many early nights, Yuni challenged herself to not quit, to give in to the forces that were bent on breaking her. She had not run away from her father's harsh hand, only to die on a small pile of hay covered in horseshit. But, over time, her willpower began to slip, replaced with the constant reminders that a harsher reality was about to come with winter. If she didn't find a job and better shelter, she wouldn't have to worry about anything once the white months came. Their girls had no concerns. The long days and harsh nights provided plenty of time to think about what she'd run away from when she wasn't busy watching the passing residents or eavesdropping at the windows of taverns and inns, sometimes even from the rooftops. It had been a mistake. Instead of fleeing Farley, she should have stayed. At least then, Farley would be close in case his family changed their mind. The beatings from her father would have continued, she had no doubt, but shelter and food might make up for her suffering. Still, back home she had the chance to one day see her best friend again. None of that was available at this point, in this place. For days and nights, Yuni thought about that mistake and, more often than not, considered returning home with no idea how she would accomplish the task. Without a horse of her own and Clessie's lesson about the dangers of Allidor away from its villages and cities still fresh in her mind, Landor felt like a prison. Days of grating frustration finally gave way to the realization that she was never going home again unless she could catch Clessie at the market. Landor was her life, it was her fate. A parent's justice. Yuni's life was becoming a precautionary lesson for disobedient and wayward children. There was nothing that taught humility as effectively as having to find daily sustenance in the city's waste bins or quenching thirst from its gutters. One morning, her despair was unbearable. Yuni left her shelter provided by Eve's 2 neighbouring rooftops, a blessing of accidental construction that created invaluable cover and protection from the world below. Fortunate to find it, she never moved. Its height prohibited the city's banished, a term used to refer to its homeless, Yuni learned, from seeking out her cove. She scaled the buildings easily enough as long as its occupants were not home and the city guard was not near. None of the other banished were capable of climbing the building, she was sure of that. If they were, they would have done so. This place was as safe as she had been since before her father started beating her. The solitude also provided hours of undisturbed sleep without having to worry about being robbed or stabbed out of the spirit of senseless violence. The cubby hole had become her world. She even began leaving her meagre belongings behind whenever she ventured out to find food or a bucket with the previous night's rain still trapped inside because she no longer feared someone stealing them. A home, as humble as it was, still alienated her from Landor's regular citizens, who avoided her at every opportunity, as they did to all the banished. When she held the room at the Boar's Head, people avoided her because she was a stranger, with even stranger hair and eyes. Now they did so because of the way the dirt clung to her face and how the months of living in the streets led to the rot taking hold of her clothes. Most days Yuni could even smell her own unpleasantness, but Landor, unlike the farm, did not provide swimming holes or streams. Yuni learned the harsh lesson that the banished were more than an inconvenience to the city. They were a scourge to avoid at all costs if one were to remain healthy. In Landor, where Clessie had promised opportunity, Yuni only found rejection and humiliation, reminding her, as much as her father did, that she was worth less than others. But this place also taught her to fend for herself unlike any other time in her life. Months of scourging for meals and drink taught her things about herself and the world no other person could have instructed her on. And one place where she always found more fortune than famine was the central market. It wasn't the one Clessie had shown her when bringing her to the city. Landor had a number of them, but it was nearly as robust. This market had become Yuni's favourite place to visit because of its pleasant smells, jovial patrons and artisans. Most of the vendors sold meats and fresh vegetables of all varieties. Some prepared meals on site for their wealthier customers, making Yuni's stomach growl in envy. The spices tickled her nose as the meats roasted. It was torture, but the most enjoyable kind imaginable. Every visit to the market took her away from the struggle that surrounded her, always lifting her spirits, if only for an afternoon. Today it was busy even though the hour was early. Yuni deliberately left her shelter as soon as she woke to get to the market while many of the vendors were still setting out their wares. She didn't expect to be handed advantages from her arrival, but doing so created the potential that she would be the first to any discarded scraps. And there was always the hope that one of them, finally, would have a task she could complete for a meal or even coin. She kept that hope, though none had ever taken her up on her offer, usually preferring to chase her away from their stalls. Yuni approached carefully, staying far from the vendors. Being too present as a banished was the same as showing aggression, an easy way to get thrown out of the market or into a prison cell before finding a scrap of pig or breast of chicken, if luck shined on the day. More than a few merchants eyed her cautiously, but she kept her distance, displaying her intent to not cause trouble. Her stomach twisted in a painful growl. I know. She patted it, a gesture that didn't sate it in the least. But it would not win. She could not afford to allow hunger to drive her. Instead, waiting out the vendors might result in sympathetic favour. Desperation would not. Hanging on the periphery of the market, Yuni watched them move about, preparing for the day ahead, scrambling to finish to receive the crowd of locals soon to arrive. But there were others about today, and not just the merchants and sporadic showing of city guards. They did not have the appearance of the typical customers either. Off to the side, a group of younger boys and girls zipped in and out of the stalls. They were dressed in wools dyed dark, the kind of clothing that bespoke of banished attempting to pass as regular citizens. Fascinated, Yuni watched them move through the aisles. The small group of 5 children, the oldest was a handsome boy who appeared to be her age, the youngest was a boy of maybe 8, fanned out. A coordinated movement, Yuni realised. But why? They moved so quickly the vendors did not take notice, and the few who did only did so for the batting of an eye before returning to their preparations. Yuni pushed back against the wall, staying in the shadow to watch without drawing suspicion to her actions. There was a method, a pattern to the manner in which the group moved, that was not benign. One stall was being encircled, and the vendor was unaware. That was as clear as the waters of the Lake of Tears. He was a butcher. His stall held racks of ribs, legs of cattle, and giant slabs of red meat that made her salivate even in its uncooked state every time she walked past it. Unlike many other vendors, he never bothered her. An immense man, he had thick arms with a barrel chest and belly. His grey hair was pulled back in a ponytail. Bearded, his moustache was so full and long it looked as if a ferret had died there on his face. Definitely not the healthiest vendor she'd seen. He looked strong, especially the way he threw slabs of meat half her size around as if they were feathers. If this group was targeting the butcher, they would find themselves on the wrong end of his cleaver. The butcher wore a tanned leather smock over his black wool shirt. Blood covered it. As he carried 3 racks of meat from his wagon stationed just behind his stall, the group adjusted their approach. They're targeting him, she said to herself. The worst part was that the butcher appeared clueless, going on about stocking his stall with the last of his goods. He returned for another trip, his hands full when the group, still spread out, made their move. A tow-headed blonde girl no more than 13 cycles old bent to slide her hand down her leg. Something in it gleamed in the early light. Then she dragged her leg to trip over the short stack of crates in front of the stall and fell to the cobblestone, sending a piercing cry into the early day. Her eyes welled with tears as she grabbed for her ankle, sobbing loudly. Please, help me, please. The butcher, an armful of bloody cuts, dropped his load and rushed to her aid. It looked to take great effort for him to drop to a single knee to check on her. Yuni could not hear what he was asking because his voice was lower than the girl's. The young actor cried louder at his unheard question, pointing at a crate that had toppled over, blaming it. The butcher put a bloodied hand to his cheek, staining his beard pink. Other vendors watched the event with passing interest, nothing more. The actress moved her hand from her leg, and Yuni saw that she was bleeding. What was the shiny object in the girl's hand right before she tripped? A blade. Had the girl purposely cut herself to play this act out in style? The butcher laboured to his feet, waddled quickly to his wagon, digging around in it until he pulled out a ragged blanket from its confines. As he did that, 2 members of the child gang moved to the store, snagging 3 sides of beef. Yuni's mind froze. The thieves were away before she processed the events and before the butcher turned from his wagon. They fled the market before he returned to the actress to wrap her bloodied leg in the blanket. Her sobbing slowed, but she still played the role for all that it was worth. As he held the blanket to the girl's leg, trying to console her, the front of his stall was being deprived of many of his wares as the remaining boys filled their arms. The other vendors, distracted with their work or out of apprehension, didn't take notice. Yuni started moving now. If something like this happened to her family, it would set them back an entire season. Who knew if the same could be said for this butcher? By the state of his clothes and wagon, he wasn't suffering, but he did not appear to be thriving either. Before she was halfway to the store, the first 2 boys returned, arms empty, to help the others steal more meat. With each passing moment, more of his wares were being lifted, and the poor man had no clue what was happening. Realizing she wouldn't make it in time to stop the group of thieves, Yuni found her voice. "Hey!" Her voice filled the market. The butcher looked her way, giving her a cursory glance, still unaware of what was happening behind him. Her cry received more attention from the crew of thieves. At her call, the oldest, the handsome one, slapped the nearest boy on the arm and gave a stiff nod. Without another command, the entire crew wrapped their arms around their loads and scurried off, taking different paths. The butcher lumbered to his feet, his hand going to his head again when he saw what was left of his inventory. Snarling, he turned to the girl who had started this, but she was already on her feet, miraculously healed and sprinting away. He made to grab her, but she was far too quick and left him holding air. Yuni raced to the butcher as the handsome boy sprinted in her direction. He was on her before she realized the dangerous position she had put herself in. With his arms full, the boy's eyes were locked on hers as if he were trying to memorize her face. "Do that again and we'll get you," he snarled, racing past and slamming his shoulder into hers. Yuni hadn't expected the physical attack and was off balance. She fell to the rough cobblestone. The fading footsteps signalled nothing further was coming. Unhurt, she got back to her feet and went to the butcher. He stood in front of his stall, staring at it dumbly. When she neared, he pulled his hand away from his face and looked at her. "Are you okay?" Yuni nodded. "Yes, I'm sorry about what they did, and I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." His eyes blazed with anger. "You saw what happened and said nothing. Are you working with the little bastards?" "I said something as soon as I realised what they were doing. I wasn't sure before that. If I was working with them, I would not hang around here talking to you and risking getting your cleaver stuck in my head." The butcher laughed curtly, pulling his eyes away from her back to his half-empty stall. "I can't believe they got me again." "Again? They've done this to you before. You know who they are?" He dipped his head in a sharp nod. "Everyone does. Bastards do this to all of us. Guess it was just my turn this time. The little group cost us coin after coin, hit us quicker than we can recognise they're around." "Why don't any of you stop them?" The butcher grunted in agreement. "You saw how they operate. Quick little buggers. Sneaky too. Don't think I've ever seen the same ones twice, so never sure who you need to be watching out for. Can get exhausting. I should have known better." He shook his head and repeated his self-criticism with more ferocity. "I should have known better. But hey, if it hadn't been from you, I would have lost much more. I appreciate it. How can I thank you?" "I did what I thought was right." "Aye, might have been what you were doing, but you still saved me coin. Wouldn't have happened without you putting yourself out there like that, putting yourself at risk." "At risk?" A long silence followed before the butcher answered. "A banished not from Allidor. Should have figured. Lots of you aren't from the city. Come here seeking dreams and die from the nightmares she sends." Yuni gave a shy nod, drawing a deep breath from the man. "You helped me and caused problems for that group. Let me do something to you in return. What will it be? A banished like you could use a favour or two, I'll bet." "Thank you, but I don't need anything. I just wanted to help because what they were doing was wrong." Without another word, he moved behind his stall, grunting as he bent to reach for something unseen. When he stood, he held a patchwork cloth bag. "Be that as it may, my experience tells me that someone looking like you can always use help. And don't let it be said that Alta Lolop doesn't help those who help him."
Here." He handed the bag across the counter. "Take this."
"What is it?" she asked, taking it.
Alta snorted. "Mrs. Lawlop isn't much to look at, nor is she interesting to talk to anymore, but she is one hell of a cook. That was supposed to be my meal, but the least I can do to repay your kindness is to give it to you and hope it gets you through the day."
Yuni stared at the bag. "I can't take this."
"Why not?"
"It wouldn't be right."
Yuni thought it explained everything. "Nonsense." Alta waved a hand filled with thick fingers at her comment. "Take it. Least I can do for what you done. Now, I need to see about the damages and call on the city guard. Hope they'll come around to do something this time, though I'm not expecting much. I wish you the best of luck. What'd you say your name was?"
"Yuni," she answered, thinking that he did not need her last name.
"Well, Yuni," Alta said, going back to his business, normal routine resumed. "May the gods find favour in what you've done today. Good day to you."
It was an abrupt and awkward end to her morning, but at least she had a meal, one that might last another whole day, and she still had a full day ahead where she could scrounge for more. It wasn't much, but it was a break, and she would gratefully take every single one fate or the gods granted. Chapter 5. Hired Hand. The small sack of food from Alta lasted for 3 days. Better than she expected, though stretching it was so difficult. And the large merchant was correct about his wife. Mrs. Lolop was an amazing cook, and how Yuni maintained the willpower to make the sack last as long as she did was a miracle. The potatoes held a spice that tickled her nose, and the meat was the moistest, softest piece of rump she'd ever had, though she had less than a handful in her entire life. Meat was too expensive, her father defended with a shout more times than he laughed. Each time a bite melted in her mouth, the memory of her father's complaints faded further into the recesses of her mind. The enjoyable meal also made the endless search for scraps at least tolerable, though the weather diluted any enjoyment she got from eating. All day a stiff wind had blown through Allidor. During the daylight, she heard tradespeople murmuring about the stormy weeks to come off the Sierran mountains that would chill the city right up until the white months, they said. The shelter was good in the fading summer, but now, as the world embraced the early signs of chill, Yuni didn't expect to last long in it, especially if she couldn't find enough food to keep herself strong. Deep autumn wasn't supposed to come for another few weeks, according to the farmers at the market, but sitting in her cove created by the 2 rooftops, mostly concealed from the direct assault of the wind, Yuni believed otherwise. She pulled her knees in against her chest and wrapped her arms around them, pinching her cloak closed from the inside, trying to stay warm. The previous night had been miserable, and instead of searching for food today, she spent most of her day looking for scrap wood that was large enough to block the open mouth of the cove that the eaves created. It wasn't until evening, as the sun hung low, falling behind the buildings at street level, that she came across what looked to have been a stable gate that had corroded at the hinges. The wood was moist and rotted in spots, with a few holes and gaps in the slats. After she pulled it out of the trash heap, she tested its sturdiness and only carried it home when she was convinced it wouldn't fall apart along the way. Carrying the rotted gate through the streets brought her unwanted attention along with disgusted stares. Sadly, she was becoming accustomed to the attitudes Landorans had for the banished, and spending energy worrying about them wouldn't keep her warm at night. When she made it to the back of the building atop which she lived, Yuni used her double-layered sash to strap the gate to her back and climbed to her rooftop hideaway. Exhaustion made her muscles burn by the time she wedged the old gate against the lower slope of an eave. She sat back to appreciate her work. It didn't block all the wind, but it was a massive improvement. Done for the evening, she laid back to sleep. The creeping cold delayed the blissful nothingness of sleep, but it finally came. Yuni let herself slip into its embrace, the only place where she was not perpetually cold and hungry, but the sleep was neither consistent nor refreshing. Over the night, she woke dozens of times to pull her cloak and the ragged blanket she had found a few days ago over her head and upper torso. When the morning came, she was awake before the sun had fully risen and the world still chilled. The best way to fight off the cold was movement, so Yuni reluctantly left her covered shelter in search of food. Her stomach twisted with hunger pains, her side pinched like the time Bailey bit her because she teased the poor animal. She couldn't continue this way. Each day that passed without food and clean clothing, she became more firmly set in this vagabond lifestyle. Tradespeople and merchants at the markets were becoming less open to helping her, and craftspeople had stopped entertaining her weeks ago. The scrawny filth she had become repulsed more lanterns every day. When the white months came, their rejection would not matter. The snow would pile on the rooftops, making her climb to her shelter treacherous, if not impossible. Up there, starting a fire was equally unachievable. She had been naive, and now she faced the very real prospect of dying on a strange rooftop in a foreign city before the planting season came, unless something changed. The time had come to force that change before she had to sell her grandmother's amulet out of desperation. The first task was to head to the market, the one place where she had somewhat of a connection, no matter how thin, with someone who might change her fortune. Allidor was already setting up a stall, the sun having risen above the houses above the square. He jumped, raising a cut of cow's leg as if he was about to strike, when she greeted him. Yuni chuckled at how ridiculous he looked. "By the gods, I nearly jumped out of my skin," Allidor said, lowering the cattle leg before glancing around conspiratorially. "Don't tell me you saw those little bastards again already. They rarely strike the same market again so quickly." "No, but," she raised a finger, "that's why I wanted to talk to you." Allidor's moustache twitched. "Talk to me about what? I'm behind on getting ready for today's customers, so I don't have much in the way of time." "I know, it won't take much. I wanted to talk to you about hiring me." Allidor laughed, the ends of the long hair in his moustache flittering. "You trying to mesmerise me with those eyes of yours? Hire you? For what? You're one of the banished. You can't possibly have any skills I need. I'm sorry, child. You've been pleasant and you don't bother us when you come looking for scraps, but I can't use you." "I warned you about the group stealing from you." Allidor turned to his stall, rearranging cuts of meat, not bothering to look at her. "Aye, you did, and I appreciated it. How was my wife's cooking? Don't imagine you brought my sack back." It lay back in her shelter. She felt guilty but hoped he'd forgotten. The sack had proven helpful in her daily scrounging. Taking advantage of the butcher's kindness was a consequence of her station, not her desires. Allidor read her non-response accurately. "So you come to me looking for a job, but you keep the gifts I give?" The large man's voice was light. "If you hire me, I can make you even more coin than you're making now," Yuni pressed. If this fell through with Allidor, she would try the other 100 vendors. If it didn't work here, she would hit every market in Allidor until she found someone who would see her value. Either way, they were her last hope, otherwise a cold rooftop death awaited her. "Ha! And how in Allidor would a scrawny girl like you be able to do that?" He waved a hand, seemingly perpetually stained with the blood of his work, at his stall. "In case you weren't aware, I'm in the business of slaughtering. It's not easy work, especially someone your size. Ain't no squirt butchers that I know of." Yuni was already shaking her head before he finished. "Because I wouldn't help you with the butchering." "Then what would I be paying you for?" She allowed the confident smile to spread. "I can stop the thefts." Before he had a chance to resist, she continued, "You already told me that it wasn't the first time you had your product stolen. In fact, you said the others in the market had the same thing happen. I can't help everyone, but I can help you. I can make sure you know whenever they're around before they're aware they're being watched. As far as them sneaking off with your meats, I can follow them so you can call the city guard and this trouble ends. No more losses, no more time taken away from your work to ensure they don't steal a month's worth of your labour." She let the ambiguous offer hang in the air. Allidor paused slightly. She'd gotten his attention. "How?" "The same way I did the other day. Hide, either amongst the patrons or somewhere I could observe the entire market from. These," she indicated the rooftops, "are easy for me to access. I can climb to any of them. I have. From my hiding spot I could send you a signal, a whistle or something, whenever I notice someone acting suspiciously or, as that gang did, when they're building a coordinated attack. You could focus on selling instead of guarding your wares. Plus, you'd have peace of mind knowing if they did get away with something, which they won't if you're listening for my signal, you can find out where they're operating from. I'll be able to track them. Not only will you get your goods back, but you'll put them where they belong. In a prison." "I don't know." Allidor sounded like he did know, like Yuni's proposition made complete sense to him. He arranged his offering slowly now. Yuni had him where she wanted him, considering the benefits of the arrangement. He was a businessman, so he would think like one. Life was about coin, at least her father taught her that much. How much coin did you lose when they stole from you the other day? Allidor did a quick calculation, tilting his head to the side. Roughly 25 silvers. Yuni blinked in shock. What she could do with 25 silvers? That much? Aye, those little bastards were good. And yet if I worked for you, I could have prevented it, Yuni teased. 25 silvers saved for the long white months ahead. Allidor harumphed. I'm not saying I'm considering it, but how much would this service of yours cost? More sense in pursuing this if you're looking to put me out of business. Yuni raised her finger again. Putting you out of business does nothing for me. 3 coppers a day? 3 coppers! Allidor coughed a laugh and smiled. You do look to put me out of business. Having rehearsed this over the past day as her desperation to not die over the winter grew, Yuni spread her hands and let her face fall in genuine humility. This was not an act, it was the real fear coming through. 3 coppers a day keeps me fed and sheltered, which will strengthen me. That will make me more responsive, aware, and more able to detect and react to any theft, even a group-coordinated attack. Anything less and I won't be able to afford food and shelter because I would have to choose between one. 3 coppers would have you sharing a stall with a horse. Allidor's laugh held a hint of humoured criticism. Still better than what I have now, she said, lowering her eyes to the cobblestone, transforming the butcher's laugh to a groan. Allidor stopped arranging and rearranging his meats, turning to face her squarely. Yuni could not meet his analysis as she waited for his decision. Each precious moment flashed by. If he planned to deny her, forcing her hand in starting this routine over again with hundreds of other vendors, none of whom she had proven herself to. In a flash of panic, she wondered if she left Allidor today, would she be able to make it to the Salt Sea before the white months came? Rumour was the Great Sea's weather was moderate throughout the year, making living outside possible. You will have a deal. The weight of 1,000 worlds lifted from her shoulders. Great! Thank you, Allidor. Thank you so much. It was Allidor's turn to wag a finger. I said you will have a deal, but first you need to prove yourself. Yuni's head jerked. Haven't I already done that? Aye, you perform well, but you brought me a business proposition and I only work with serious business people. Another barrier to warmth and food. She stifled a groan. What do I have to do? Instead of answering, Allidor turned away, moving to the back of his stall, framed by a shorter counter. He lifted a canvas sack, folded and tied into a thick rectangular shape, held together with a rawhide cord. It was as wide as she was, Yuni noticed. Allidor hefted it with a grunt, blowing out slightly and moved to the front counter, dropping it with a solid thud. He pointed at the package. That needs to get to a friend of mine in the East Side Market. Do you know where that is? She knew every market in Allidor, because the markets were the lifeline for all the banished. The east side was the worst part of Allidor. She nodded. Slapping a fat hand on the top of the package, Allidor said, Take this there. Look for my friend, Ayla Swearman, the only butcher in that decrepit market. Don't tell him I said that, Ota said hurriedly. I owe him this payment. Do that and I'll consider your proposition. Yuni hefted the load and it almost pulled her to the ground. How would she make it out of this market? Never mind all the way to the east side was a mystery. The large man laughed at her struggle. She stuck her tongue out at him. If you want those coppers, you'll see this through. If you don't, you'll owe me. Tell Eilis to write a receipt. I'll know it's his handwriting and that'll be enough proof that you were successful. Sorry, but I'm in the meat business, not the business of trusting the banished. Still, you could be useful if you're successful. Now, get going. Both of us have work to do. Yuni hefted the package onto her shoulder. Her lower back groaned in protest. This was going to be a long, uncomfortable walk across the city. Her arms burned even before she made it to the banking district, the last place in the city she needed to seek rest. The district was unfriendly to everyone who did not have short hair or wear silks, or anyone who did in the dishonest gesture of wealth. Word amongst the banished was that the district kept thugs on their payroll to enforce its immaculate image. Yuni took a maze of alleys at each turn, avoiding the streets, even the minor ones, to avoid running into one of the district's enforcers. Many of the paths she chose were unfamiliar, but the emptiness allowed her to pause each time she needed to rest. She would pay for this task for days if her back's stiffness was an indication. Like everything in this part of Allidor, the alley was clean and bright. Light cast down from the rising autumn sun eradicated shadows. Her boots clicked on cobblestone and she set the package down for what felt like the 10th time, pausing long enough to check her surroundings. Alone in the alley, Yuni was unnerved. In a strange part of the city, an alley no less, she felt too comfortable. Rumours of the threats to the banished in the banking district were stuff of legend in her circles. But every alley was as still as the night raised her suspicions. When attentiveness meant living another day, ignoring intuition was a dangerous game. She was spending too much time looking over her shoulder, imagining lurking threats where there were none now, slowing her progress and delaying earning Alta's business. Focused, re-energized, Yuni picked up the package again and pushed through the pain and discomfort, putting the system of alleys and the district behind her without incident. A few neighbourhoods later, she entered the east side of Allidor, signified by the consistently deteriorating homes and businesses. The street narrowed ahead, giving her pause. Nothing. Complete silence. No sounds of anything that might pass as a market. Then the barking of a solitary dog somewhere in the distance partially disrupted the silence. The creature sounded miserable, but Yuni followed its call just the same. At least it was a sign of life, something this street didn't provide. Quiet like this meant trouble, and she meant to be as far away from that as possible, especially while she still possessed Alta's goods. A block further, she crossed another person. This one, an older woman, bent at the waist as if the weight of life pushed her down, never altered her direct approach. Moving sideways, Yuni stepped out of the woman's way, setting the bundle down so she could wave to the older woman to show she wasn't a threat. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for the market. Can you point me in its direction?" The woman had a burst of energy at the question, pushing beyond Yuni without a word. "Hello?" Yuni shouted after her. The old woman did not stop. In fact, she shuffled away more quickly, looking over her shoulder.
"Get out of here! Don't want no trouble!"
A voice, aged but aggressive, called down from the second story of a nearby home. Yuni looked up at the man. A few strands of his white hair were pulled toward the back of his head. He was shirtless and his lips fell into the cave of his toothless mouth. "Sorry, but I'm just looking for the market."
"Told you, we don't want no trouble."
"But she started, but it was cut off when the old man slammed his window shutters closed. Shaking her head in disbelief, she continued down the street, keeping an eye out for strange people and an ear out for familiar sounds of a market. The package got heavier as the day warmed. Alta didn't say a word about expediency, but Yuni was not interested in dragging out this task longer than necessary. Street after street, the few Landorans she crossed paths with were no help in finding the market, and she almost gave up hope until she came across a young man who pointed her in the right direction. "You're 3 blocks away, that way." The man, who could not be 17 cycles yet, with hair so blonde it was almost white, pointed and then moved away and disappeared before she could thank him. "Everyone here is absolutely crazy," Yuni concluded. Soft sounds of vendors hawking their wares filtered up the street. Encouraged by the approaching destination, she strode to the market, surprised how much different it was from her neighbourhood one. Here, no one looked happy, not even the vendors, appearing frustrated with the disinterested patrons. The market was a quarter of the size of the central market, and the air was still, as apathetic to life as the people who breathed it. "Best get this over with as quickly as possible," Yuni said in counsel to herself, then sought out Alta's friend. The first few vendors she inquired snapped at her for interrupting their business, though little commerce was taking place. Finally, she found a more helpful one, who pointed her toward Alta's friend. The layout of the stalls required her to weave often in the crowded, narrow paths. Much like the central market, the wares here reflected the local condition. Vendors sold bruised fruits and vegetables, spotty cloth, farm tools, some bent and rusted, filled with many stalls, while a few displayed cheap leatherwork. The market even had wood carvers, though their goods were basic enough that Yuni doubted they would last more than a few cycles of cautious use. She found the butcher, about the same age as Alta, with a stall half as big. Eyeless watched her approach. She set the package on the nearly empty counter and took a deep breath. Her arms burned so much, she was forced to painfully extend them to get it to stop. Eyeless looked at it with suspicion.
"What's that?"
"Payment from Alta. He said he owes you," Yuni said between pants. "He'd like a receipt to prove it was delivered."
"Would he now? Paper is expensive."
Please, don't do this." The fear that she might have done all of this for nothing and would now have to walk back to the central market without proof pressed on her, speeding her breath. Losing Alta's trust was unthinkable. He would never hire her if she did not finish this first job. "I'll pay for it." The offer was out of her lips before she thought it through. I can't pay for it now, but I will after I have earned coin." "No deal." Yuni swallowed down desperation, trying to force herself to stay outwardly composed. "How much does a sheet cost?" Eyeless raised an eyebrow. 3 coppers you ain't got." She scanned her surroundings, looking for anything that might solve the dilemma. "Could you use a skin?" Eyeless laughed caustically. "I wouldn't waste a skin on a receipt for you or Alta. Come back when you got paper." "But I can't come back. If I don't bring him the receipt, I don't get paid. Please, I'll pay double for it by next week." The butcher looked her up and down, examining her. "You don't look like the kind that will come through." Could she rely on Alta to back her up? What other choice does she have? "I will. 6 coppers for a receipt right now." She tapped his counter with a finger. "Take it or leave it." Eyeless considered. Yuni couldn't breathe while he did. "Deal. But you will pay within 3 days. 3 and not a day more. Alta will know about this, so don't do anything slick. I'll send the city guard for you if you do. Trust me, girl." She shook her head. "I'll pay." The man grunted and bent to reach beneath his counter. A slow, tearing sound lifted her spirit. He sat up straight again, holding a tiny shred of paper. "This will have to do." He scribbled a note and signed it, thrusting it out as if she were the most bothersome thing in Allidor. "Thank you," she said excitedly, snagging it and dashing off back to the central market. Lightened of the heavy load, the facile journey ended quickly. She couldn't contain her smile when she handed the receipt to Alta. He took it and looked at it for far longer than he needed to. "Impressive. That is definitely Eyeless's handwriting. Looks like you did well." Yuni watched his hands, hoping they would slip into a hidden coin pouch for payment, but they didn't. Instead, the large man clapped his hands once and beamed. "You got yourself a job. 3 coppers a day starting tomorrow. I get robbed, and you're out on your ass." Though he had not immediately paid her, Yuni shook with excitement she could barely contain, jumping with a shout and scaring the neighbouring vendor who was painting a landscape nearby. He scowled at her, the stray brushstroke a manifestation of Yuni's joy. She waved an apology, but Alta just laughed. Employment meant food and shelter. With the white months coming, she no longer had to worry about dying on a snowy rooftop. Weeks later, Alta was good to his word, giving her regular work which earned her coin. Far short of a fortune, it provided enough to rent a small empty stall in a nearby stable in central Landor. The horses reminded her of Bailey and kept her company during the nights that grew longer with each passing day. The owner, Jazel Erti, also included meals, so eating became a regular event, and soon Yuni was putting weight and muscle back on. Eating every single day was something she would no longer take for granted. Each time Jazel or one of her children brought a plate out, Yuni thanked them, to the point that Jazel told her to stop, or she would stop providing the meals. Though the landlord meant in jest, Yuni stopped. Life in Landor had proven to her that the only chances worth taking were the ones that preserved her livelihood. That wasn't where the good news ended. "Hey, Squirt." Alta greeted her with the nickname he said she earned shortly after starting to work for him. "Chill in the air. I'm afraid we don't have many weeks left of warmth." The chill had been present every morning and evening. That was nothing new. "It is. What happens to the market in the white months?" He shrugged as if the question were meaningless. "People still need things. It'll get a lot slower, but some of us will still be around here, at least on the days we can travel." "What about you? Will you still be here?" "Aye, best time of year. The prices of my meat go." He gestured upward with a jerk of his thumb and a smirk. "If you're worried about where you will make coin, don't bother. I'm here every day, just like the sun. A lot of the stores will close, not much need for farmers and artists in the cold months. So you've only got a few weeks to earn coin off of them." Yuni blinked. "You look confused." "I am." "Well then," he roared, "I guess you haven't heard the news." When she didn't answer, he filled in the missing information. "You've been hired by the market." Whatever reaction he was expecting, he did not get. His twitching moustache conveyed his confusion. "Let me help you then," he said when she did not respond, moving close enough she could smell the raw meat on his scent. "Ever since that first day when you caught that gang of bastards, I've been talking you up to the others.
For years we've been the target of thieves, been needing help, but the city guard won't do a thing. We've asked, trust me. We tried to take justice in our old hands, but in case you haven't noticed, most of us are middle-aged. Wielding a cleaver is simple. Chasing those little rats isn't. You can. You have. Seen you make 40 or 50 runs from me. Never had a thing stolen from you. You've stopped how many thefts in just the past few weeks? Yuni shrugged.
I don't know.
She did. 8 robberies, he answered for her. See, you got me thinking. Your skills keep the thieves at bay, and with you talking about needing to earn coin, I figured we could all benefit from this. If I got the other stall owners to agree, we could take up a collective fund, and you would work for all of us. That way, if you earn more coin, and we get to keep you on our side when that thief guild comes around recruiting, it's a win for everybody. Yuni was shocked. Alta had already been thinking about this and talked to the others. Never, though he probably had dozens of chances, did he let on that he was up to something. At first, she thought she would have a fight on her hands to convince him to hire her when the market reopened, and during this time he had been figuring out how to give her more opportunities. The image of Clessy, never forgotten, floated in her mind's eye. He wiped his hands on his smock, wearing the warmest smile Yuni had seen since her last sparring session with Varel. So, what do you say? You ready for some hard work? She returned it. You bet I am. Alta threw his head back, crowing. I figured you'd say that, but it's still good news because I already obligated you to the others. Glad to have you on our side. Just hope it doesn't come too much trouble for you. Yuni was about to laugh until she realised he wasn't joking. Trouble? What kind of trouble would working for you cause? Well, with being on the payrolls of so many, he wagged a fat finger in the air in a circular motion, it means you'll be running direct interference on the thieves' operations. If word of this spreads to the other markets, they'll be looking to hire someone like you too. Don't imagine they'll take too kindly to that. Meaning, you can expect to make enemies as soon as they find out. Which they will, Squirt. Mark my words. Trouble could be avoided easily enough, and all the vendors pitching into one collective fund to pay her meant she would never have to sell her grandmother's amulet. Could life in Landor get any better? Chapter 6. A Door Closes. That'll be 5 silvers a month. Can you afford that? Yuni narrowed her eyes at the man's presumption before remembering the vendors in the central market had doubted her until she collectively saved them hundreds of silvers. So much had changed as summer gave way to the season of the death, as leaves turned to brilliant oranges and reds before fading into browns of the dormant season and falling to the hardening soil. She was now employed by more than just the central market vendors. Others near the market and in merchant circles had heard about her skills, how she had replaced the city guard to enforce a facsimile of a king's justice to protect the livelihood of dozens. Alta had been right. Word had spread, and now she was making more coin than she had in her entire life. 5 silvers a month was easily manageable. Yuni could afford 3 times that if she wanted, but until she had enough stashed away to buy her own home, frugality was the order of the day. Corvallis Jasper was a squat man, balding and perpetually bent over. He watched her with a skepticism of age, but never met her mauve-coloured eyes. I've had a few young ones rent from me after the wife passed. It's nice to have another person in the house, making noise and living life. It gets too quiet now that she isn't around. But also, I had a couple skip out when they fell behind on rent. As long as you aren't planning on that, I don't see us having problems. Do you? Shaking her head, Yuni smiled. Not at all. I won't be causing you any problems, Mr. Jasper. But I'm afraid you won't see me here that often. I work every day and a number of evenings, if the work is there. But that means you won't have to worry about me skipping out on rent. His lips wrestled, bottom fighting top. Yes, I have heard about that. I don't work much nowadays myself, but I have several friends who do, so I keep up with the happenings in this part of the city through them. Seems everyone is pleased with you. Yuni looked around the modest home. It was filled with a variety of knickknacks of exquisite taste. Porcelain dish and glassware filled the open-faced cabinet. Crystal animal figurines, some griffins, deer, too many serpents, and even grand dragons sat on display for visitors to honour and enjoy. Rich cabinetry lined the walls of the kitchen, and the finest oak furniture she'd ever seen filled this room. The tea he served her was from Glendoran, he claimed. Glendoran tea! What would Varel say about her now?
Life would be easy here, since he'd promised her full range of the house except for his sleeping chambers at 5 silvers per month. Yuni almost felt guilty agreeing to the terms, even though it had been his proposal. Throughout their time visiting, she reminded herself how dangerously close she had come to having to sleep in the streets during the winter. Those thoughts quickly put a halt to any guilt she felt about the terms. "I know I have to prove it through my actions," she said, "but I do hope to earn your trust soon. I'm sorry others have abused your kindness, but you can rest assured I won't. Life is already hard enough without people taking advantage of one another." Corvallis rolled his lips over each other as if he was chewing something. That it is. Then he smacked his hand against his leg. "Well, I imagine a young one like you has plenty of things to get to. I won't hold you up. Move your stuff in whenever you can, but your first rent is due now." "Yes, of course," she said, digging into her purse and handing over a gold coin, 6 months' worth of rent. Corvallis looked as if she had just dropped a dead Caladrius in the palm of his hands. Now, I don't need any trouble, young one. Wherever you got this gold, you can—" "No trouble, it was earned honestly." He watched her, and Yuni refused to fidget under his gaze, a skill she had picked up from watching the vendors have awkward negotiations. With a grunt, Corvallis slid the coin into the pocket of his jacket. "See that you keep behaving that way, and we'll get along just fine." "I imagine we will anyway," Yuni said. They had completed the transaction. She was going to have a roof over her head, a real roof, and guaranteed meals for at least half a year, though she doubted the old man could cook like Jazel. With more vendors contacting her, even before they would need her in spring, life in Allidor was improving dramatically. As she stood to leave, her mind drifted back to the merchant who started this, Clessie Gargon. For the longest time, Yuni hadn't believed the woman, but Clessie had been right all along. When you took charge of your own destiny, you created it, and now she had hers. "I have some work to finish, and then I will collect my things and return this evening, if you don't mind." "You'll live here now." Corvallis's fighting lips curled up in a smile as he tapped the pocket where he'd hidden the gold coin. Yuni left the home and made her way back toward the central market. She couldn't wait to tell Alta the news. He was happy she did not think his emotional range swayed far beyond basic responses when she told him. "About time you got out of that blessed stable," he said. "Now, maybe you'll save enough coin to get a place of your own one day." She winked. "I'm not even thinking about that right now." You might not be," Alta responded, "but it's something you need to. I don't imagine that man is renting his house at a charitable concern. It makes coin, and that, not from your farm roosters or the sun, is what makes Allidor wake each day. Coin, and the need to protect it. Don't be fooling yourself about that. So do me the favour, and make sure you're thinking about your tomorrow. You've got to have plans for yourself." Yuni patted the big man's shoulder. "Thank you. I promise. I'll save every coin I can and set myself up with the largest house in all Allidor." At the comment, Alta guffawed. "Will you now? Well then, that's impressive. Even bigger than the wealthiest criminals." "Not all wealthy people are criminals." She didn't know any wealthy people, so she couldn't base her opinion on any fact, but there had to be some good people among the city's richest, surely. Alta cast her a sideways glance. "Wealthy people only reach that status by inheritance or by taking advantage of others. If you haven't learned that about Allidor already, you will. I just hope your lesson won't be too harsh." She was about to respond when she noticed something strange. A few stalls away, Yuni felt like she was seeing the past. Before the central market employed her, before she had said her first word to Alta, Yuni had seen this young girl she was now looking at. It was the girl who'd pretended to hurt herself to distract Alta so the gang of children could rob him. She was back in the marketplace and scouting a target. She moved closer to Alta, speaking low. "They're here. No, don't look," she said as he started to turn. "2 rows over. Looks like they're targeting Nari." "We've got to warn her," Alta growled. She rested her hand on his arm. "You stay here." Alta looked at her askance. "If he started before she cut him off. "No. You'll make a scene and scare them away." "Good." But Yuni was shaking her head. "If you frighten them, we'll catch one. But if you let me handle this, we can capture her. And if we do, she might lead us to the older one who seems to be leading them." Alta's eyes widened as he realized what Yuni was saying. When he spoke, his voice held a dreamy quality. "Getting rid of them for good." He cleared his throat, his eyes holding a twinkle of faux tribulation. "But you do that, and you'll be putting yourself out of a job." "I guess I would be," Yuni admitted. But it's the right thing to do. Maybe then I could bother you until you teach me your trade."
"Teach you? I'll charge triple for that," Allidor said with a wink.
"Keep your promise. You don't move." The butcher sighed melodramatically, only partially serious.
"I promise. Now catch that runt so we can be done with this inconvenient nightmare."
Yuni moved away casually, as if she were interested in what the other stalls offered, always keeping the young girl in her periphery. The girl moved around the stalls in an inconsistent path. Yuni suspected she wanted it to be difficult to track her, drawing less suspicion. For one so young, the girl was as highly trained as the other thieves she spied on. Nari still hadn't reacted to the thief's presence. Not surprising, the vendors never did. At both ends of the aisle, the stalls formed a T, reducing the girl's avenues of escape to 2, unless she bolted through a stall, which was a possibility Yuni had already anticipated. Still, best to force the girl in the direction she wanted, and that would require a cautious approach. She moved further down the row, making sure she took the time to stop and appreciate the offerings from the various vendors. "You're up to something, Yuni Brave." Francesca Rayliat waggled a knitting needle in her direction. Her goods were precious commodities, especially with the white mumps barreling down on them. Yuni stopped and picked up a scarf that would look wonderful on her one day when she could afford to buy it. "I'm protecting your ass," she said without pulling her eyes away from the scarf she held. For her part, Francesca played the role perfectly, remaining calm. "See that you do. We appreciate you." "Thank you." The young girl moved in a pattern that might appear haphazard to anyone else, but that constantly drew her closer to Nari's stall. And she wasn't working alone either. The faces always seemed to change, but the ages rarely did. As she moved down the aisle, Yuni saw 4 other children eyeing stalls too casually, with too much interest. For a moment, she second-guessed herself, thinking she might be mistaken, because adults accompanied a pair of them. But it was in the way the children carried themselves, the way they gawked at goods that were not of interest to typical children, that drew her skepticism. The blonde girl moved to Nari's stall. Too obvious. Yuni realised her mistake. The young actor wasn't the one assigned to steal. She was playing the role of the distraction again. Behind the stall in the next row, children slunk into position. 3 of them now, coming from 3 different directions, all moved toward the same destination. There were too many, and they could easily cause enough confusion to escape with a handful of Nari's goods. Yuni wanted to avoid drawing attention because it would eliminate the chance to get her hands on this girl, but the opportunity was slipping away. The group was too much for her to manage on her own. If she didn't do something now, the gang would once again rob one of her employers. This time, it would happen on Yuni's watch. There was only one thing left to do: to sound the alarm. Before doing it, Yuni cast her gaze to Allidor. He was watching her, waiting for the signal to get involved. Getting his hands on the thieves was something she owed him for everything he had done for her. She owed all of them that much for giving her a chance when no one else had. The day interrupted by threat, the vendors turned, recognizing the call. In the time it took a puppy to get excited to see its master, they armed themselves with weapons hidden in bags or under countertops, long ready for the opportunity to finally rid themselves of the child gang of thieves. "Get them! There they are, bastards!" The vendors' response was immediate and aggressive, surprising even Yuni, and they caught the thieves off guard. A fisherman named VL Iwart grabbed for a boy of 8, who frantically looked around for his peers. The boy flailed in VL's grip. Another, a simple farmer named Baz Trupter, who never seemed interested in hiring Yuni, snagged the handsome boy from the first incident, the one who threatened her, by the collar. The boy swung, connecting with the side of Baz's face and sending the clumsy fisherman to the ground. The young girl who started this attempted to run past, but as she went by, Yuni stretched out her arm, clotheslining the girl and sending her crashing to the ground in a yelp. The teen boy who had knocked down the fisherman cupped his hands around his mouth and gave a loud whoop. It sounded as if he were calling out to wolves. Suddenly, any advantage the vendors had dissipated as dozens of teenagers raced into the market, weapons in hand. Some of them carried daggers, some truncheons and spears, a few carried swords. Frozen by the sudden appearance of so many armed gang members bent on violence, Yuni lost focus. The young girl she'd spent sprawling to the ground was on her feet again. Before she recognized what was happening, the girl swung a truncheon. Yuni dodged, causing the girl to miss with the iron-banded end, but the haft connected solidly with her ribs, making her double over and gasp for breath that refused to come. Pain exploded across her back when she was hit again. Yuni fell to the ground, her face exploding in fire. When she could roll over, sucking in her breath to fill her lungs, Yuni pushed herself up and noticed that the entire landscape of the marketplace had changed. Her side raged in fire, but at least she wasn't bleeding. Vendors and thieves fought in the aisles, steel on steel, metal against metal. Everyone fought for their lives. She didn't have a weapon. She never thought to buy one. There was always other priorities, and she kept her training sword tucked away since she got to Allidor, because one of the banished had no use for weapons, unless they wanted the attention of the city guard. Now she was caught wholly unprepared and useless. The vendors did all they could to fight off the gang, but they were business people, not warriors. They were no more prepared for this than she was. The thieves were, and they were winning. Oscar Ravel screamed out, clutching his gut, blood dripping between his fingers as his face paled. The thief who stabbed him was already moving toward another struggle to help his peer gain the numerical advantage. Another vendor, and then another, went down as the gang outnumbered the older vendors, complemented by their superior weapons training. Just when it appeared all was lost, Yuni heard a distant whistle, a metallic clanking, rhythmic and consistent. She drew a relieved breath, finally able to stand straight when she saw the city guard racing into the marketplace. At their appearance, the gang dispersed. Most, the ones fighting toward the outside of the market, got away, but those in the interior were trapped. The city guard moved in for the capture, even as a line of them struggled to hold back the enraged vendors. They, too, were also being arrested as more of the guard flowed into the market. Yuni bent over, hands on knees as adrenaline racked her body. Their ambush had spun out of control so quickly. Shame-faced, she wasn't sure she could look Alta in the eye again for starting something this tragic without being prepared to deal with the consequences. Before she could wallow in her misery, though, a strong pair of hands grabbed her, reaching her arms behind her back. "Hey!" she cried out. "Shut your mouth," a gruff voice said from behind her as her hands were bound together with rope. Yuni attempted to turn to face whoever was assaulting her and received an elbow to her lower back that sent her crashing to the floor. The gruff voice was above her now, its armor chinking, the city guard. "I told you to keep your mouth shut." "No, please," she cried. "This is a misunderstanding." Yuni lifted her head to explain that she wasn't one of the throng of thieves, but she never got the opportunity. She stared at the bottom of a military boot. The foot crashed down into her cheek, making her face explode in pain. The world wavered as the voices of upset people filled the day, their voices fading into an indistinguishable foam, fading away with the rest of the world. As Yuni came to, the first thing she noticed was the dank smell. "About time you woke up," a familiar voice said from somewhere in the world's dreariness. Yuni forced her eyes open, the piercing pain refusing to fade. "Alta?" she called out in a hoarse whisper. Her voice echoed slightly. She squinted against the orange light, trying to blink her vision clear. "Yes, Squirt, I'm here," he said, his voice soft. "So are you, and so is nearly the entire market." The market? What happened? Blinking, she made out Alta. He was across a dark aisle inside a prison cell crowded with 15 other vendors. She was in another cell, but not alone. Yuni slowly turned, her cry catching in her throat. She was being imprisoned with the very people she was hired to protect the vendors from. This couldn't be true. She spun to Alta, the world swirling with the quick movement. He seemed to understand exactly what she was thinking. "I tried to tell him you weren't one of those vile scum, but you know how authorities can be. They weren't interested in hearing anything I had to say. But don't you worry, we'll figure a way to straighten all of this out." "Please help me, Alta." He nodded slowly, a dark shadow passing over his face. "As soon as I can, I'll promise. I'm currently a little useless and a whole lot uncomfortable, but I'm alive, which is more than I can say for some." "How many?" Alta scowled. 3. 3 people dead in senseless violence. For what? Part of her wanted to turn and confront the gang of thieves. The rational part knew that would mean death. 20 mostly young faces snarled at her. Even the pair of men who had to be older than 30 looked at her as if they would enjoy ripping her limbs from her body. She turned back to Alta, pleading with her eyes. He gripped the bars of the cell as if it would stop him from falling off the world. "I'm so sorry, Alta." But he shook his head. "Don't be. It's not your fault, it's theirs."
he said, dipping his head at the people behind Yuni. Not only did they take 3 of our friends from us and injured most of the rest over here, but thanks to that attack, the city guard ordered the market closed indefinitely. We're hurt, our families need rumour to know what happened to us and where we are, and now it looks like most of us have lost our way of life right before the white mumps, including you. Alto apologetically spread his arms. Yuni slumped against the bars. As soon as the gods had given her a break, it was taken away. She put her hands to her face so the thieves would not see her cry. Chapter 7. A Way Out.
"They better let us out soon," the young blonde girl, who Yuni came to know as Allidor, said. Yuni was careful to watch Ali, knowing her clothesline was as likely to be forgiven by the thief as Yuni was to forgive the other girl for the bruised ribs. It was a mutual dislike tempered only by confinement. "It's been 3 days, the handsome ringleader of this gang, Zeph Iriot, said. "Eskrit will get us out of here soon. You watch." Ali crossed her arms and slumped against the wall. "Well, he better hurry. I'm getting tired of being in here, and if he doesn't soon, I might just do something violent to her." The young girl shot Yuni a meaningful glance. Yuni gave her a flat smile that was anything but friendly. One-on-one, she would have welcomed the girl's aggression. There was a lot that weighed on her mind and heart, all of which these thieves were responsible for, and, even surrounded, having an excuse to unleash that hurt was tempting. "Who is Eskrit?" she asked instead. Every head turned. "What's it to you?" Ali snapped. "Just making conversation, friend. I am not your friend, none of us are. Keep you and your freaky eyes away from us," the young girl said, arms still crossed. Over the past days, the pair of cells holding the market's combatants had grown quieter, the mood darkening as reality sunk in that the city guard would be true to their word. The market was closed, with no idea when or if it would open again. Life was changing for everyone on each side. The silence hinted at bored minds mulling over what that meant for individual futures. "Her eyes are pretty cool," Zeph said before turning to Yuni. "To answer your question, he's our leader." "He's a powerful son of a bitch you don't want to mess with," another teen boy, Hem, said from his permanent spot in the corner. Yuni hadn't even seen him pace during their imprisonment. His placidity made her bones ache. If he was uncomfortable, he did not show it. "I'm not looking to mess with anyone," she answered. "Just curious who might be, since he seems so important to you all." "Eskrit is the most important person in Landor," Zeph responded. "I haven't heard of him." Zeph shook his head, disgusted. "Because you're not one of us. Otherwise, you'd know exactly who he is." Yuni turned away, wrapping her hand around a cell bar, not bothering to see if any of the vendors in the other cell were listening. Each passing day weighed more heavily than the previous as hope dissipated, each prisoner falling into their own despair. She could not face Alto's empty eyes right now as he detached while the passing days dragged on. "I wouldn't want to be one of you. What you did to those vendors, that was a crime. It was unfair and disgusting." Zeph pulled his legs up to his chest, wrapping his arms around his knees and rocking forward. His smirk was more of a sneer. "What we did? Don't act like you understand us or our business." "That's not business. That's theft." Suddenly, Ali was on her feet, fist clenched. "Let me see her straight, Zeph." He waved his hand toward the floor. "Sit down. We don't need trouble with the city guard, plus there's not enough space for you to beat her ass, and it won't matter when Eskrit gets us out of here. You can play with her then, when the guard isn't around." Retaking her seat, Ali sneered at Yuni. The thought of revenge would carry that young spitfire through a number of days. "You don't scare me," Zeph snickered. "The way you clutched at yourself, you could have fooled us." "Well, you don't. None of you do." She tucked her hands underneath her legs to prevent anyone from seeing them shaking. By Ali's taunting snicker, she didn't think she succeeded. "We don't care about that anyway," Zeph said. "Then what do you care about, besides robbing hard-working people of their livelihoods?" Zeph snorted. "You make them sound as if they're victims." "They are!" She jabbed a thumb over her shoulder. Behind her, Yuni heard stirring. "We're the real victims," Hem said in a biting tone. "We don't expect someone with your place in the world to understand that." Around the cell, heads nodded. A young boy pounded his fist into the opposite palm. One of the older men jerked his chin upward and grunted. My station? You don't know anything about me. Heat warmed her neck at their collective presumptions. Life must be so tough when you can wear those nice clothes, Ali said, pointing at Yuni's outfit, the one she'd brought just last week, her first new set of clothes since her mother made one well over a cycle ago. People who walk around looking like you don't know what struggle is. You have no clue about me or my struggles, Yuni said, more defensively than probably necessary. She was outnumbered and isolated with the gang. Combating them on who had it worse was pointless. They weren't the kind to understand her. They were criminals. And you don't know ours, Zeph countered, his voice much calmer than his younger counterpart. So you take things that don't belong to you to make up for it? They didn't harm you. They worked hard for what they had, and you took it from them as if you're entitled to their goods. There's no shame in a single hair in this entire damn cell. So much for not combating them. There was a quality about the boy that drew it out of her. There was no time to gauge his reaction. Ali was on her feet, rushing forward. Before anyone could move, the thief was on her. Yuni slid to her back, swinging a leg and cutting out the younger girls. Ali crashed into the bars. A thick thud later, the girl fell to the floor unconscious. No one moved to help. Yuni scrambled to her feet, waiting for the next one to attack. Leave her alone, or I'll break your necks the moment we step outside this prison, the tired voice from the other cell, Alto warned. We're not bothering her, old man, Zeph said indignantly. He pointed at his fallen counterpart, but was speaking to Yuni. Ignore her. She does stuff like that all the time. Pretty bad temper. When she comes to, she'll be too embarrassed to bother you again. At least for another day. Great. He clapped his hands together and leaned forward, like he was trying to reason with an upset toddler. Listen, I don't expect you to understand or even care about why we do what we do. Your kind think you have it all figured out. The sad thing is, even trying to help you understand why you're wrong is a worthless use of time, because none of you want to listen. Yuni spread her hands. Then why don't you tell me? Why not explain so I can understand it? It's not like we have anything else to pass the time. You won't listen. How do you know unless you give me a chance? She looked around the room. The thief gang was so young, except for the pair of adults who watched her between their fits of sleep. Whoever they weren't important enough to not have someone half their age speak for them. You seem to think you already know me, committing the same crime you accuse others of, but you don't. That I was forced to flee my childhood home to escape an abusive father, that I left without a coin in my pocket, and what I have, she gestured at her clothes with a wave of her hand since Ali had tried to use it against her, didn't come from carrying favor from the wealthy class. It came from hard work and struggling through a lot of cold, hungry nights. And that's only a portion of who I am. So if you think you're the only one who has ever struggled, that I can't possibly understand your plight, you couldn't be more mistaken. Throughout her diatribe, Zeph listened. When she finished, he nodded. Fair enough, but we don't do this because we want wealth and riches. Most of us were orphaned. He circled the room with his finger, all young heads shrinking in shame almost instantly. Now he pointed at the pair of adults. Some have been mute since the day Liatl blessed them with life. Either way, we are Landor's rejects. The king doesn't provide for our type. You talk about what you have. Well, what we have, we must gain on our own. During your struggles, you surely realize Landor doesn't give up her possessions easily, even if they help a child live another day. There was sense in his argument. Yuni understood exactly what the handsome thief was saying, her mind flashing back to Griesler, the Boar's Head Inn owner who had thrown her to the street the minute she could not pay for another night. In an instant, the featureless faces of thousands of Landorans who had shunned her when she was hungry and cold came back in a flood. So why the vendors? They struggle too. Zeph shrugged. An easy target. Where else in the city can you find so many necessities in one place? Sure, we could rob the wealthy homes, but they're usually high protection, and those hired thugs don't give a damn if they're beating a child. It's happened. Why should we put our lives at stake for another meal that might keep the fever away? Unless you think that's fair. He let the question hang in the air. Of course not, but still... Zeph loosed a harsh laugh. There you go, already rationalising why what we do is wrong without considering its necessity. Do you know what is more criminal than stealing food and clothes from the market? Yuni didn't answer immediately, sensing he was leading her into making his point for him. When she could not think of anything, she said, "No." Zeph spread his hands as if her admission answered everything. "And there's the problem. You're not unlike the rest of Landor. People go about their days working hard, sure, but going home to a roof over their head and a warm meal in their guts. If your struggle is, as you say, then you understand what sort of privilege that is. On a deep level, you know it's precious. That's why we do what we do, so we can survive another day in a kingdom that doesn't care for its neediest. Don't talk to me about what's criminal if you can't see the sense in that, the true crime." It was an argument she couldn't combat. What Zeph was saying, even though she struggled with the ethics of what the group did, wasn't without truth. Ashamed, her gaze fell to her feet before moving to the unconscious younger girl who stirred. A girl who was too young to need to steal in order to see the next morning. "You're right," she admitted, a trivial sentiment that felt so empty in the larger context of life in Landor. Metallic clinking sounded from down the hall, cutting off further conversation, the sound of the guards arriving, but it wasn't time for their meal. Yuni pushed herself up and slid to Ali, slowly sitting her up against the cell. The girl was groggy and mostly incoherent, but conscious. "Wake up," Yuni whispered. "The guards are coming." Ali blinked away the drowsiness holding her head. The quick footsteps of multiple guards echoed down the long hall. "Be lively," Zeph told the assembled gang of thieves. They responded by moving closer together in the middle of the cell. It was like they knew something she didn't. Zeph waved her toward them, inviting her in. With a quick glance down the hall, Yuni spotted the large, distorted shadows of the guards flickering on the walls and moved toward the group. The entourage approached, the oldest guard pulling a large ring of keys from his belt. "Looks like it's time for you to free my cell of your rancid odour." With that, he unlocked the door and stepped back, extending his arms, gesturing down the hall. "My boys will escort you out." "Escort?" Yuni heard Ali ask Zeph quietly. "We'll talk about that when we're out of here," he responded in an equal volume. The small squad of guards were already moving down the hall. She gestured at the vendor's cell. "What about them? Are they free as well?" The old guard didn't bother to turn, instead shoving her forward. "None of your concern. Now get moving." She leaned around the man to find Alter's inquiring gaze. He was sitting up, as were the other vendors, interested in what was happening. "I'll find out what's going on, I promise," she told him. He nodded in a silently despondent way. Before she could say anything more, he shoved her again. "I said to get moving. There's somewhere you need to be, and it ain't here." Before she could ask another question, Zeph was by her side, pinching her arm painfully and whispering in a harsh tone. "Stop asking so many questions. Just follow our lead and you'll be free of this place." She snapped her mouth shut and nodded, still on her guard, remembering Zeph's comment about allowing Ali to play with Yuni when they were out of the prison. The entire group was marched out of the prison, up narrow stairs to the surface street. The day was overcast, a slight drizzle falling. In the street, a black-covered carriage, its windows drawn, waited. Behind it was a long wagon uncovered. The gang moved to the wagon and Yuni followed suit. "No, come with me," Zeph said, pulling her toward the covered carriage. "While we were imprisoned, I received a note during one of our meals. You have an appointment with someone important." She followed silently. The driver pulled the door open as she approached. "Go on, climb in," Zeph said when she paused at the step. She craned her neck to peer inside, but with the windows drawn and the overcast day, she could not see much, except a thin pair of legs outfitted in black silk pants. Yuni grabbed the handles and pulled herself up, taking a seat on the bench opposite the passenger. His hair was cut short, indicating his wealth, as if the carriage and silk clothing didn't already do that. An older man, probably in his 60s, his fading black hairline receded aggressively, the thin patch in the front was sparse. Contradicting that, his moustache and beard were full, growing halfway down his neck. His brown eyes were set apart but piercing, hinting of a dangerous mind. The long red robe fell across his thighs, opening around knee-height leather boots. People in the banking district dressed like this. Them and the visitors to the market who tended to buy half of it.
Few others in the city could afford such clothing. "I'm glad you're able to join me," the man said by way of greeting. He watched her with an unwavering gaze, meeting her mauve eyes directly. "My name is Eskrit Dalrai, and I was hoping to converse with you." Zeph climbed into the carriage and took a seat next to her. "I did not have much of a choice," she said, looking around the carriage to avoid his eyes, which made her feel like he could read her soul. Eskrit spread his hands. "A matter of semantics. I'm a busy man. Instead of chasing you down, this is a much better investment of my time." "I don't think I understand," she said carefully. "That's fair." Eskrit leaned back, the leather bench creaked. "My crew should not have shared much about us and our work, at least I hope they did not, especially while you were imprisoned along with the vendors. We wouldn't want that sensitive information about our operations getting out now, would we? The reason I asked you to join me is that I have a proposition for you. Work, if you will." "For you?" Yuni could not keep the repulsiveness from her words. Zeph may have helped her see the fuller picture, but it was still a revolting scene he'd painted. Eskrit's eyes never changed, but he slowly raised a single eyebrow. "Yes, for me." She looked at Zeph. This was the last thing she expected, though expectations of what was real were shattered by her imprisonment. He encouraged her with a dip of his head. "Thank you, but I'm not interested." Her refusal hung in the air in the privacy of the fanciest carriage imaginable. Eskrit's face was unreadable. From the way the thieves talked about him, Yuni imagined this man wasn't often told no. She didn't mind being his introduction to denial. "You're telling me you're not interested in coin? You don't want to make a living, possibly keep that apartment you just secured? I find that hard to believe." She sat up straighter. "I already have a job, and how do you know about my apartment?" Eskrit leaned forward, stapling his fingers with his elbows resting on his knees. His perfumed aroma crossed the carriage, making her throat scratch after days of smelling the dank filth of the prison. "It's a true misfortune, but with the market now closed due to the event the other day, there is no way of any of you to earn a living. Surely you will be looking for opportunities since, without the market, there is no need for your services. Impressive services, I might add, which is why I wanted to talk. I could use someone with your keen eye and athletic attributes." "What are you talking about? I've already told you I won't. Ever since you caused the first problem for me, I've been interested in learning more about you." The coin your interference has caused me." Eskrit gave a self-satisfied groan and sat back against the bench. "Following you, watching how you conduct yourself has been a challenge. Did you know that? Even for my most skilled trackers, but it was necessary to reduce the risk you created. I operate deliberately, reducing as much risk as possible. You understand?" Yuni's face twitched at the disturbing revelation that Eskrit had her followed. "Don't let that upset you. The people assigned to the task are talented, the best you'll find in Allidor. No one ever notices. It's nothing to be ashamed about." "But why? What do I have that is so interesting to you?" "You mean besides an obvious abundance of talent?" Eskrit laughed heartily. It sounded sour to her ears. "I'm a businessman, Yuni. I recruit the best of the best Allidor has to offer. And from the reports I've received, you have made a great addition to the team. Once we trained you in our ways, you might be better than the trackers who helped me monitor your actions." He looked towards the curtain-covered window and loosed a short, bitter laugh. "Hundreds of gold you have cost me since the market and the shop owners hired you. Hundreds. For you to work for me?" His eyes found her again. She fidgeted. "I see your value, your worth, and our guild, the Cardinal Ministry, recognises you. The question is, do you want me to change your fate? Work for the ringleader who stole from innocent people?" Even after the conversation with Zeph about the gang's motivation, Yuni could not find peace with their tactics. There had to be another way. There just had to be. Yet, "I'm not interested." "Even if refusing me means you'll be back on the rooftop again?" Eskrit's tone was mocking, aggravating. It was the tone of a man in power who enjoyed having the upper hand. His web provided him with every tidbit of information he desired, while she had none about him or this cardinal ministry. "Allow me to encourage you to make a wise decision. I had a short conversation with your new landlord.
He put a finger to his lips and looked away in mock surprise. Well, your old landlord, I guess. It seems Corvalius Jasper is a man of the world, though that might have been something to do with paying him 4 times what you paid for that room. Unfortunately for you, he agreed to my terms, leaving you with nowhere to call home. Now don't worry. He held up his hand when she was about to interrupt. We kept your belongings safe back at our den, and no one has gone through them. Everything you owned before this incident is still yours. Well, except for your apartment. Work with me, and everything is returned. They took her home? Had he done these very same things to the thieves she'd been imprisoned with, the ones who he made steal? Either I accept your offer, or I'm out on the street again? She needed to hear him say it out loud. She needed to know he was stealing from her, just as he forced the gang of children to steal for him. One job, Eskrit replied, holding up a finger. That's all I require. Why just a single job? Instead of answering, Eskrit looked over to Zeph. Signal to the driver. We need to be about our business, even if the wagon isn't loaded yet. They know where to go. Zeph nodded and left the pair alone. His muffled words drifted into the carriage as she stared down the face of evil. Eskrit leaned closer. There are few I trust to accomplish this job. I won't pretend there isn't an element of danger to it. There is. From what my team has told me, you have the skills to handle it. Plus, you won't be going alone. I'll send an entire squad with you to ensure the job gets done. This is blackmail, Yuni growled. Eskrit waved that finger at her. It's commerce. Trade, if you will. You have abilities I need. I possess food and a roof to help you get through the white months ahead. Right now, we're simply bartering. I thought you said it was a single job. Eskrit nodded. It is. Then why are you making it sound as if it will take months to complete? Because it will require training and then travel. I will compensate you well. More than the food and lodging. There is coin in it for you if you're successful, so much that you'll be able to reject future offers from me or anyone with a fat coin purse in all of Landor. Think carefully on this offer. I'd hate to see misfortune fall on you. What was there to consider? What options were there? She was desperate and without a home, her belongings, and very little coin. Even the group of Landorans who had become her foundation, her friends, were sitting in a prison. Eskrit had control. She was going to have to do what he required, because if she didn't, she would be right back to where she was before she convinced Allidor to give her an opportunity. And she promised herself then that she would never return to that state once she had a full stomach and a warm room. Veiled threats were an old tactic of the men in her life. So much so, she had grown numb to them long before this thief king tried to pull her strings. Eskrit, no matter how revered by the gang of children of thieves, could not hold an axe to her father. Her life was hers to direct, no one else. She had taken control and created opportunities where there were none before. Now, she would do it again. What is the job? Yuni said, feeling reluctantly satisfied that she wasn't going to die of the cold. For the first time, Eskrit's eyes sparkled with life. There is an item, a very valuable one, I need you to acquire. One of the most precious items of antiquity in all of Allidor. You will steal the bloodstone for me. Chapter 8. A New Path. Crossing the eastern branch of the Tyr River via an unmarked bridge south of Landor, Yuni found herself in the infamous Forest of Shadows, quickly understanding how it got its name. It felt warmer than the open plains they had travelled to reach it. Seth was suddenly laughing, breaking her alert analysis of the surrounding trees. Relax. The forest doesn't get dangerous for at least another day's ride. Yet one more day and we will reach the ambush spot. See? You only have to survive 2 days. Well, 4 days if you want to get out again. Based on what you've shown in the past month's training, you might just make it. Yuni's eyes narrowed, and she stuck out her tongue, making Zeph laugh harder. 2 days away from the trail of thieves, 2 days away from their mission and the payment that followed. Then what? Yuni didn't want to think about that now. The time to reflect and decide would come, but could she really leave the Cardinal Ministry? It was strange how quickly she had bonded with the guild, especially Zeph. Who would have thought she would one day look past his handsome face to see the kind heart inside? But it happened, and she would never change a thing. Blushing at the thought, Yuni reflected on her strange recent past. 2 months after her conversation with Eskrit, Yuni now saw the guild for what they were. Living among them every moment of every day helped open her eyes and stop denying the harsh truth of life in Landor. Instead of young victims of a manipulative, wealthy man, they were a tight-knit family, taking care of and looking out for each other where the world hadn't. It instead forced the guild's hands, their solutions the only feasible course of action. They operated on the margins of a grey world everyone of privilege pretended was black and white. This mission would be difficult, but it served the guild her family. They were headed to the Trail of Thieves to intercept an item called the Bloodstone, an important artifact from a culture now long lost, rumoured to be carried by an influential mage from a city called Amarek, one Yuni had never heard of before. Eskrit had taught her about the Bloodstone, claiming it had magical properties that would draw a high price from the right bidder. Her assignment was to steal it while the rest of the crew ran interference. Eskrit promised, if they were successful, the proceeds from its sale would be put to helping even more of Landor's children, just as he had done for the nearly 100 who lived in the den. They spent the rest of that day and the next riding until darkness fell, making camp each night in the quiet wild. Zeph warned her not to be lulled into comfort by the silence, swearing the forest held some of the strangest and fiercest creatures in all of Allidor. The crew backed up his stories of monsters that hunted unsuspecting travellers never to be heard from again. But it was the fancy of childhood nightmares, Yuni knew. They were toying with her, as they had done more and more as they accepted her. Still, it was an enjoyable time of storytelling and shared of dried deer meat, not the most delicious meal she had had lately. But it was because Eskrit was true to his word and fed her well. Probably the best she had been fed since running away from home, even better than what Griesler provided at the Boar's Head Inn. There were 10 in the party, experienced members of the Cardinal Ministry and all hardened by years of missions. Yuni felt comfort in their company and confidence, knowing she could rely on them. In fact, that calm remained until the night before the raid. There, sitting in the darkness and listening to the fire crackle underneath the stories of the older thieves, her thoughts consistently returned to what would come with tomorrow's sun. The crew drifted off to sleep, and Zeph curled around her, but Yuni lay underneath her cloak, refusing to fight off the night's shiver as she stared into the dark canopy above. Her heart raced with excitement and trepidation, and she didn't stop thinking until sleep finally took her. The morning came, cold and with muted sun, the standard set by the forest of shadows, the men said. Spots of sunlight hit the forest floor, but the shadows were copious, making it easy for the thieves to race to their destination without much worry of giving themselves away. At the ambush spot, everyone took their positions on 2 rising hills that pinched the trail. Yuni remained with Zeph and 5 others, while an archer and 2 men, to act as his defenders should they be required, crossed to the trail to the opposite hill. "How long do you think we'll have to wait?" she asked Zeph. He blew a stray brown weed out of his face as he dug as deep into the hillside as he could, telling her it was better for cover and warmth while they waited. The moss and weeds had grown tall. Yuni had thought it would provide adequate cover, but seeing his actions, she began digging into the hill as well. Zeph looked up the trail where it was wider, the canopy of trees stretched across it blocking out sunlight. They were in thick shadow, with only a 30-foot swath of sun hitting the frosted dirt in between them. The sunspot was where they would try to intercept the wagon. "It could be at any time," Zeph responded, "but our network is always accurate. This party left Arlene the day before we left Landor, so they will ride through today." The network was proven correct when only a few hours passed before the creakage of wagon wheels on the dirt trail sounded ahead. A single wagon with canvas draped over the back rounded the bend, accompanied by 4 mounted guards, a pair on either end. Even at this distance, their armour and weapons betrayed them as trained guards. The thieves had no armour. They were going to have to be clever and fast, just as they planned. "You ready?" Zeph whispered. adrenaline thumping through the veins in her neck. "You've got this. You've had training and you're one of the most skilled in our guild," he said. His lips, the lips she wanted to kiss, spread in a warm smile. She did have this, she knew that. Throughout her training with the guild, she had impressed with her agility and stealth. From the beginning, she only improved in all areas, quickly surpassing much more experienced guild members. Even among her brethren thieves, Yuni could traverse the entire den undetected. Those skills convinced Eskrit he had chosen right when he selected her to be the one to acquire the Bloodstone. The wagon drew within range, and the crew moved before Yuni took the chance to follow through on her desire to kiss Zeph good luck. The largest member of their team, Lul, crashed through the trees and stood in between the two hills, blocking the trail. The wagon driver pulled on the reins, bringing it to a halt before Lul's weaponless but still intimidating presence. A passenger sat beside the driver, cloaked in a full-length red robe and hood, which he didn't lower when he looked up at the disturbance. Yuni couldn't see the passenger's face, and he kept his hands inside his sleeves. Lul's massive shoulders slowly rose and fell along with his breaths. Never the most nimble, the giant thief didn't have to be. That was why he was assigned to the party, to do what no one could. The mounted guards leading the wagon looked at each other and then back at Lul. "Get out of the way, giant," the guard, lifting his Saleh's visor, exposing a salt and pepper moustache, ordered. "I can't do that," Lul answered in a deep voice. At his rejection, the mounted guards unsheathed their swords. Before they could ride Lul down, the pair of archers fired from both sides of the rise, striking true and taking the pair of guards out. That spurred the driver and his passenger to attention. The driver pulled out a short sword. The passenger climbed from the wagon and moved to the back even as the following guards rode forward to meet the attack. Zeph whistled the signal to move, and everyone did at once. The seven stepped out from hiding and raced to the trail to join Lul while Yuni moved. The shouts drew the attention of the cloaked passenger, bringing him back toward the front. His hands were empty, yet he was still moving to the fray. If he'd grabbed a weapon, she didn't see it. The passenger was not her worry, though. Racing down the slope and into the forest, Yuni used the trees as cover to circle to the back of the wagon. The cloaked figure had started undoing the cover's ropes. She finished the job. Flipping the canvas back, she was surprised to see the wagon nearly empty, containing only a few crates of food, a garment bag, and a sack toward the front. As the clanging of steel filled the forest, she scampered into it and snagged the bag, suspecting it held the Bloodstone. It was heavier than she expected, requiring her to use both hands to jerk it away. She grimaced against the noise the contents made as she pulled the sack over the wood, taking a glance to see if everyone was still distracted with a fight. Two thieves lay in the middle of the trail. Petea and Alessi, two funny thieves, too young to die. Blood drained from their eyes. Yuni stumbled. The vision of her father and what she did to him came back like a hammer blow, almost toppling her from the wagon. In front of the horses, Zeph helped fight one of the last mounted guards. His head snapped in her direction, his face falling. "By Allidor's eyes! Yuni, grab it!" His shout drew the attention of the cloaked passenger. The man turned, pulling back his hood. The passenger's eyes narrowed at her. His skin was black, older, a few cycles younger than Eskrit. The tight curls of black hair were only beginning to grey. Stress lines cut through his forehead alongside the corners of his mouth, making his cheekbones appear more pronounced. He scowled. "Shit!" Yuni said, tugging the heavy sack toward the back of the wagon. No longer caring about the noise the container inside the sack made, she dragged it across the rough wood. "Come on!" she growled when it caught. She watched the cloaked passenger as she neared the edge. The dead look in his eyes urged her to continue. He meant menace. His hands began to raise in her direction. She jumped to the ground as Zeph raced around the wagon and tackled the mysterious passenger. They disappeared out of sight, though she could still hear their struggle as the rest of the fighting faded with each casualty. She untied the sack. Inside was an ornate box, purple, with gilded design along its edges. The latch was solid gold. She lifted it hurriedly, revealing folds of purple silks, darker, deeper than her eyes, encasing the precious contents. The Bloodstone wasn't special, though Eskrit never hinted it would be. Still, Yuni couldn't believe how plain it was. A medium-sized stone, one she would have to hold in two hands, It was painted in a red glyph of concentric circles enclosed in a triangle. The lines varied in thickness, but the colour was consistent. Blood red. Zeph screamed, drawing her attention. Hands go to his eyes. Yuni's mind froze as, underneath his palms, blood trickled down the sides of his face and then gurgled from his mouth. He fell to the forest floor and, within a few breaths, the most handsome thief in Allidor stopped moving. "No!" she screamed. So much death. Eskrit had described this as a dangerous mission, but she had no idea that death would come to so many. Not to Zeph. He had become so much more than a peer and companion. He was gone, taken from her in the same manner as Batir and Alessi. Taken. Like everything I hold dear. Taken in the cruelest of ways, under the hand of magic, like what I did to my father. The tall, cloaked passenger was on his feet, having dispatched Zeph. His hood had fallen over his face during the struggle, but now he pushed it back, turning his dark face in her direction. He extended a hand. "Do not touch that." There was something in his smooth, rich voice, something that made Yuni tremble. He was warning her away from the item they had come for, the sole reason behind the violence, behind the gods robbing her of Zeph. Was any of this worth dying for? The guards, the wagon driver, all the thieves bar her, Malik and Tast, who had fought the only remaining guard left, and this cloaked stranger. Were all their lives worth a stupid rock? Too many dead, Zeph gone. They had just started telling each other. As the cloaked man moved toward her, both hands now out, pleading, Yuni realized she was out of time. Her friends, her only family, would not die in vain. Yuni wrapped her hands around the bloodstone and nearly fainted the instant her skin came in contact with its smooth surface. The world blurred, zooming in and out of focus. A loud whomp sounded in her ears, temporarily blocking all other sound. Somewhere in the dullness, the cloaked passenger was shouting, but she could not make out his words. Everything blurred, detached, as if she was no longer part of the forest of shadows, only touching Allidor through the gate of a dream. A nightmare. The smooth surface absorbed by her hands, as if they melded into one. Yuni's focus, her desire, was the stone. Her entire world was the bloodstone. Nothing else mattered. No battle, no thieves, no Eskrit, not even Zeph. The bloodstone was everything. As soon as she admitted it, the trail of thieves flashed back, an oncoming wave that would not be resisted. Yuni's skin prickled, not with excitement, but with presence. The cloaked passenger fell to his knees at her feet. "No, by the gods, what have you done?" Yuni stared down at the man, no longer fearing his approach or nearness. No longer caring what powers he held, she and the bloodstone. One. The man on his knees at her feet began to sob, weakened and appearing unwilling to fight. He had been defeated. But he was close, too close. The bloodstone was to be protected, more precious than anything in all of Allidor. Sobs fading to whimpering drew her attention to the stranger. "Why? Why did you do this?" Yuni pulled the bloodstone closer. "I've done nothing." "You've bonded it," the man said in a hoarse whisper, his lips quivering. He crawled backward and slowly pulled himself to his feet, taking a step away. "You bonded the bloodstone. How could you? You're nothing but a thief." She took a step away from the strange man, her last threat, as the two remaining thieves, the archers on the hill, raced to her side. "Come on, Yuni, we've got to leave," Malik said, tugging on her arm. She let him lead her backward. Malik was no threat. Tast covered the stranger with his bow drawn. "You'll never get away now. It will haunt you until the end of time." The stranger pointed at the bloodstone as he laughed. No humour, no sanity. The sound of it made her skin crawl. Even Tast nervously chewed his lip. "Keep moving," he said, his arrow nocked. "You don't even know what you've stolen," the cloaked man cackled. "You won't control it. It will control you." He finished his threat with more laughter, scratching at his face with his fingers. "Let me hold it until we can get out of here," Malik said. Yuni was so transfixed by the strange man that she hadn't noticed Malik reaching for the bloodstone. His hand was on it before she pulled it away to protect it. When his skin touched its surface, he screamed silently, his mouth open, gushing a torrent of blood. His eyes leaked a steady stream of his body's essence, as did his ears, and then Malik dropped dead. The strange man pointed and cackled. See? See? Every death that follows is on your hands now, blood mage. On your hands! He shouted as he fled into the silent forest, his anguished laughter echoing back long after he disappeared from sight. They watched him go, remaining silent, though Tast kept an arrow to the string of his bow. Allidor's eyes, what happened? Yuni knew. She had become the thing her mother and Varel's family feared. She had become the thing she'd been all along. The bloodstone had not created her. It unlocked her. She had become. We need to leave, she answered Tast, pulling him into the forest. A blood mage, she thought, as they untethered their horses. There was no way to bring back every mount. A great part of her felt sorrow for the abandoned animals, but none more so than the sorrow she felt for the 8 thieves who had never returned to the den. As they raced back toward Landor, riding into the night to get as far away from the maniacal stranger as possible, in case he changed his mind. He was no threat to her now, but she could not risk the bloodstone. Her beginning. The end. The end.